Good afternoon and welcome to our special council meeting of Tuesday, November 22nd, 2022. I'll call the meeting to order at 5 p.m. First item on the agenda is Land Acknowledgement. The town of Coaldale acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot peoples of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot peoples past, present, and future, while recognizing their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The town of Coaldale is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Moving down to agenda item 1.2, Conflict of Interest Declaration, Pecuniary and Non-pecuniary. Are there any in the room this afternoon? Seeing none, we'll move down to acceptance of the agenda. Agenda item 2.1, Special Council Meeting Budget Agenda for November 22nd, 2022. Are there any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, if I can get someone to make a motion that Council adopt the Special Council Meeting Agenda for November 22nd, 2022. Councillor Beekman, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving down to agenda item 8.1 under new business, we have our budget deliberation for 2023. We have our Chief Financial Officer and Deputy CAO, Kyle Beauchamp, presenting. Kyle, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, and good evening, Council. So we are at the second budget meeting here. So at the last meeting, just to summarize, we kind of talked about the budget process, how that's formulated, some of the financials surrounding Coaldale's status, and expected increases to maintain service levels. What we're going to start off first is talk about a few possible service level enhancements to the budgets. I'm just going to say I'll just keep going through this presentation. If Council does have any questions, just please interrupt me at that time. So here's a summary of the couple items we will go through here for possible service level enhancements. Summarizing these through this chart, this is if Council said yes to all of these items. You'll see that additional funding for 2023 would be $222,000, equal to a 2.39% tax increase. And then we do have the $336 for 2024 and $207,000 for 2025. First program.
Can I stop you for a second?
Yep.
Just for clarification, so there's 3 in 2023 that are in red: the Roger Brooks visit, reserve funding, RMS bylaw software change, and the safety fund. All those in the red, that means that the money's already there for it?
Yeah, so the Roger Brooks and the RMS, we would actually be funding those through reserves, so savings. So it's not an increase in taxes.
Okay.
First program we're going to talk about is the annual road maintenance program. So Council's been provided updates before on our asset management program. One of the big things is our road maintenance. So the town's infrastructure master plan estimated a few years ago that 57% of our road network was in immediate need of rehabilitation. So what we're looking towards is an annual program, starting slowly and easing our way up to start to put a dent in this program and kind of fix the backlog and make this an annual program for Coaldale. What we've kind of proposed here for the annual program is a $100,000 increase to the operating budget year over year. So this would result in a $100,000 increase this year, followed by 2024 and 2025. So you can see we're slowly working to build that operating budget up. Those numbers picked are just kind of picked as a round nice number for now. Again, you can see we can't really start full on the gas just for conscious of tax dollars, but this way we can slowly ease our way up. We do have proposed $1 million capital infusement as well. We'll talk more about that later on as part of the presentation. Second item I'm going to speak to is the addition of an RCMP officers. So currently the town does have 9 established RCMP officers. We do budget for a net of 8 positions. That takes into account after various leaves that do occur from time to time. The proposal to add a new position in the RCMP would be effective 2024, and another officer effective 2027. So as part of this, we're not asking council to formally commit to 2027, but it's kind of been talked about and earmarked slightly. So we just to open that discussion up a bit to give council's some direction, and just so administration can focus on budgeting that for future years.
So we talked at the last budget meeting about possibly not committing to that, and with the possibility of even decreasing the RCMP and increasing our municipal enforcement. And since then, I've been asking some questions, and my understanding, and Mark may be able to answer this, but our CPOs are not working to their full scope right now. Is that correct or not correct?
Our CPOs could apply for something called enhanced authorities, which would allow them to have more authorities than they do now. That's a process in partnership with the local police service that we would have to undertake. So there are increased service levels that can be provided by CPOs that we are not doing at this time.
Okay, so then my understanding would be that our CPOs would be able to do that petty crime investigation that is just a statistical number now for the RCMP. So you guys would actually be able to do an investigation on that petty crime?
Enhanced authorities would include anything that would be under $5,000. So thefts under $5,000, car prowlings, trespassings, minor criminal offenses, and traffic collisions.
Thank you.
So as part of this, the cost for one addition to an RCMP officer in 2 years is $219,000. That's projected to go up to $230,000 5 years from now. So this would bring Coaldale's established officers to 10 positions in 2024 and 11 in 2027.
Go ahead, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and maybe through to our CAO, if I could ask. My question is with regards to the breakdown of RCMP policing and the number of police that are employed or that are paid for through the town of Coaldale, and the number of members that would be employed through the province of Alberta. Would we have that breakdown?
Well, there's under contract, there's 9 RCMP personnel dedicated for Coaldale, and I believe there's an additional 8 for Lethbridge County, for a total of 17 for this portion. That does not include the additional detachment of Picture Butte, which has been further amalgamated under the command and control of our staff sergeant. So I don't know what the total FTEs would be, including Picture Butte, but just for this side of the river in Lethbridge County, and some of the municipalities around it would be 17 with the if Coaldale's is pooled with the provincial resources.
Maybe just as a follow-up, if I may, I don't recall the county, and I appreciate that hearing that number tonight. I guess my question would be through the council is that looking futuristic here is that we've already employed 2 more members than our initial installment when we first came on in 2016. And I'm just wondering if it'd be appropriate to have council engage with the Solicitor General and speak to the capacity that we have as a municipality, and whether the Solicitor General's office would be amiable to respond to the request by the RCMP for more personnel.
I'm not sure if I'm understanding your point, because we've already given notice for one additional one for 2024, and they need 1 year advance notice of us requesting another officer. So, is that answer your question then? Like with a 10th one is we're going to be discussing that over the course of the next few meetings, adding the 10th officer.
Yeah, I think we will need to. We should.
Okay, thank you.
And I think further to what Councillor Chapman was saying, so the county hasn't increased their RCMP membership since 2016. Their population has grown the same rate as our town, if not a little bit more. So why does the burden keep getting put on Coaldale taxpayers? Why is the staff sergeant not asking K Division to put another member in the county? As Councillor Chapman stated, we put 2 more on since 2016. There's been no more put into the county, but yet they're a regional police force that if the county Mountie is off sick, our town RCMP officer will be out patrolling that area. So we are subsidizing the province, not only by paying 100%, but patrolling in the county. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's correct.
I'm just being a little bit more straightforward, not political with it.
But with that being said, though, when one of our members gets pulled to do other duties, that's reflected on our quarterly billing.
Correct, yeah. Usually they move it's treated as a vacancy.
Yes, so it's not that we're paying to provide an officer for the county.
So maybe to that, I think the difference is that when we become short by, I can't remember if it's 3 months or 90 days or 6 months. I can't remember exactly what the breakdown is, that they quit billing us for a person that's not reporting.
Yeah, I'm not sure on those specifics. There's a number of different options around leave. And
That's part of the contract, and so when they are short for a period of time, then they don't bill us after that certain period of time. So,
Councillor Beekman.
Yeah, question to our CAO and potentially the past members of council. So the RCMP contract was initially 2 officers less than what we have. Was that also during the time when we didn't have the CPO program?
CPO program, I think, was already in place under the municipal model.
Okay.
Go ahead, Kelly.
We did have CPOs in place when we joined the RCMP police service.
Okay.
The risk assessment that they would have done would have been independent of whether we had CPOs or not. And based on our statistics, our population, data given to them by Lethbridge Police Service, a contingent of 7 was considered to be an appropriate number of FTEs relative to our risk assessment.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Kyle, go ahead.
So this is just a summary slide showing the current budget for our RCMP and how it's projected to increase over the next 3 years with the assumption of an additional FTE. So the cost lowest to highest. So we do have accommodation costs at the RCMP building. So we essentially pay our portion of rent. So if the building costs $500,000 a year from the federal government, and we have 25% of the FTEs at that building, we pay 25% of that cost. That's just an example. We do also have 3 administrative support staff at the building, followed by the highest being the RCMP cost, and then the total. So right now in 2022, we're about 1.9 million. That would be projected to go up almost 300,000 next year, and close to 2.5 million in 2025. Next project here I'll touch base on is looking at our pool and starting to look at the future of the pool and some savings that may be required. So at the September 26th council meeting, council did approve the $495,000 for renovations to the pool. So we'll touch base on those renovations specific further into the PowerPoint. But the long-term planning and budgeting for the pool should still be considered. So what we've kind of proposed here is similar to the roads program, is a yearly increase over year-over-year increase. We've picked $50,000 for the purpose of discussion. And what this would do is two things. It creates a cash balance that in 10 years, we have a reserve that can be used to fund a pool or fund a down payment depending on the scope and magnitude of the facility. And it also creates, in addition to the operating budget, so if additional funding is needed through a debenture or additional operating costs needed, we've been building up that operating budget over the period of time so that by the time we pull the trigger, we're fairly well set based on what the community is looking for. So as an example here, sticking with the $50,000, you can see over 10 years, this would accumulate to $2.75 million in cash that could be used as a down payment in those 10 years. And then that's a $500,000 operating budget, again, that could be used to service a debenture if additional funding is needed for a loan, or if additional funding is needed for the purpose of operations for a bigger facility, that could be used to fund that. So again, it's just part of some long-term planning so we're not essentially caught with our pants down and we're planning for the future of that. The next item here that I'm going to ask somebody from our planning communications to kind of touch base on is our Sunny South news circulation. John, our manager of government relations, looks like he's drawing a short straw.
Okay, so this item stems from the pilot project that was approved by council in late July, and that started in August, and is going to be concluding at the end of December. That was a 5-month pilot project for full circulation Sunny South News each week. Essentially, we're proposing to council 3 different options. 1, to discontinue the pilot project. 2, to continue the current full circulation agreement with the Sunny South News on an annual basis. And then 3, to enter into a new circulation agreement with the Sunny South News that would see a single addressed copy delivered to every residence once per month, rather than an unaddressed issue delivered to every residence each week. And that third option is basically intended to provide an alternative to the current agreement, so that more copies are actually delivered to residences rather than just being caught up in junk mail filters.
So when we're looking at the budget for this, the yearly cost is about $56,000. There would be an advertising credit in that. So we're looking for $42,000 in additional tax support. So part of that advertising tax credit that's existing, we're essentially absorbing funds in our operating budget already. So the only increase here would be the $42,000 for 2023. The next item here is Roger Brooks' visit to Coaldale.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you again, Mayor. Just maybe through to John. That I read through that previous slide a couple of times and trying to understand the difference in number 3, for example. Well, even number 2 with regards to unaddressed and addressed. Is there a breakdown or a difference in that definition, I guess?
Yeah, so right now, under the current agreement, we send a blanket addition or a blanket issue to every residence in Coaldale, but these are unaddressed. So they're delivered to every residence without each residence's, without names on the paper, right? And so many residents have a junk mail filter set up, so they don't get those because they're not addressed. So if we were to move to an addressed issue for each residence, that would bypass the junk mail filter. But The trade-off is that it costs a lot more to have addressed issues than unaddressed issues because of labeling, the time it takes to apply the labels to each paper, and then there's an added cost on Canada Post's end as well for address delivery. So the difference between continuing as is versus transitioning to an addressed once per month agreement would be about $7,000 per year. So this is about $42,000 a year. It would be about 34 to 35 for one address copy per month.
So Jonathan, is that for sure that the papers are picked up as junk mail? Because I have a junk mail filter on my post office account, and I'm still getting the unaddressed copy.
So when I spoke to the Sunny South News about this, it was indicated to me that even if we were to go to an addressed versus an unaddressed kind of delivery model, it's really hard to say whether you're going to increase delivery or it's going to remain the same, because it's up to the discretion of each mail carrier, essentially, whether you get this or not. So we were looking for a way to kind of bypass a junk mail filter, and it sounds like you're already getting it even though you have one. And so I guess that would point to that variable that he highlighted, which was it's really up to the discretion of the mail carrier as to whether people are getting these or not.
But that should be something we can address with the postmaster as well, though. Like, don't leave it up to the individual mail carriers, because their superior at the post office should be able to give them direction on what they need to do.
Yeah, we could definitely reach out to the postmaster about that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, just maybe one further question, Mayor. If there might be a consideration, say, for example, an unaddressed circulation once a month, that would be an option as well. That
Yes.
would reduce those costs for the town.
Yeah, we could look at alternative delivery models as well. I don't have those costs off the top of my head. But
Thank you.
We have a lot of slides to get through tonight, but I'm going to ask another question. Like Lethbridge County, they currently send address copies to every one of their residents, right? All their hamlets and villages.
Yeah. That's
And
kind of
then-
what sparked looking into the address versus unaddressed.
Because in the discussions that we've had, then it's cheaper just to leave it as a blanket coverage versus trying to address, because it's, like you said, way more money to address it.
Yeah, if you were to go the addressed route and still do it each week, it would be 3 times the cost.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Tom.
I'll let John continue on Roger Brooks.
So at the direction of council, we've looked into bringing Roger Brooks to Odell for a 3-day visit in June 2023. Roger Brooks is an economic development expert who's well regarded in the municipal world for giving sound advice on how to develop downtown cores in particular. The estimated cost for his visit is $25,000. We're thinking that if we do go ahead with this, we might be able to get some partnerships in place with other municipalities and regional economic development organizations to offset some of those costs. But for the sake of budgeting, we're just assuming $25,000.
Thank you.
And as Councillor Beekman pointed out before, this is a one-time expense, so we're not looking to add this on to increase in taxes. This would be funded through existing savings and reserves. So whether or not if, for example, council decided to scrap this project, this wouldn't have an effect or change the taxes, as we're not funding this through tax support, if that follows. So a couple items here for bylaw. The first item we're going to talk about is an another one of those reserve funding accounts. With this being funded through reserves, we're gonna bring this forward to council here. So Mark, I'll let you talk about this.
And then just for any of the staff that come up and speak tonight, at the beginning of your presentation, if you could just give your name and title for the public record, please.
Mark Anderson, Manager of Community Policing. So the RMS software changeover request that I have here is one-time changeover cost. We're looking to migrate from our current RMS system so that we put all of our statistics and record management system under one program. This would to increase the efficiency of the operation. Right now we're using two different systems and the systems don't mend well together. By integrating the systems, it would increase the efficiency in our unit, reduce the amount of duplicate reporting, and increase our ability to be able to provide accurate reports and details back for council. The second proposal is a CPO summer internship that we would be working in a partnership with the Lethbridge Community College and the town of Coaldale to engage 2 summer interns to work in BYLAW for a period of from May till September over the summer months. This is an educational opportunity for local kids going to school. Number one. The second thing it would do is provide us support during our busiest times of the year so that we would have increased capacity to respond to calls, both for enforcement, unsightly properties during our busiest time of the year. The advantage to the partnership here is that we would be working with the college to find the best, most suitable applicants for the positions, and we'd also be working with a local support group called Fifth on Fifth Youth Services, who would be providing funding support for the initiative, which would fund up to $15 per hour for 360 hours, which would cover the entire summer internship program for each individual, which would reduce the cost of labor down to about $4,000 for the entire season. So it's very, very minimal financial impact for the town, but a really good bang for our buck in providing better service for the community over the summer months.
And that grant is guaranteed?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Next item here is the Access Coaldale Accessibility Fund. So back in 2021, we did have an accessibility audit completed within the town, which identified a number of areas that can be improved on for ease of access and accessibility within Coaldale. So now that the audit is completed, we're looking at what are the next step forward to implementing some of these changes and keeping this as kind of on a yearly program. So currently there is a $35,000 safety fund that is largely funded based on council's discretion and ideas brought forward to council. Ideas in the past have been the flashing crosswalks that have been funded through that, and other various safety upgrades. So with being mindful of the pressure on the operating budget and taxes this year, what the administration is proposing is to take that safety fund and earmark $25,000 of that specifically for the Access Coaldale Accessibility Fund. So the safety fund would go from $35,000 down to $15,000, and $20,000 would be specifically for the Access Coaldale Fund. These could be the funds can be used for the various upgrades as noted in the audit as well.
Russ Tanner, the Director of Recreation and Community Services. All right, so recent feedback suggests that there's an appetite for some Canada Day celebrations to come back to the town of Coaldale. They haven't been happening in the past few years. And so this is an item showing that there's been some planning involved, some ideas that we further plan and develop with committee and with council. But at this point in time, the service department is suggesting, and we have talked with our fire chief, and they are willing to host a breakfast on Canada Day morning. With that breakfast, we're suggesting having some bouncy castles and entertainment for the kids. The possibility of Indigenous dancing for entertainment as well. And then later that afternoon, we're proposing a pool party with DJ and tiki bar and those types of things. So people would have the option in the morning to come to the breakfast and do those celebrations, and then carry throughout the day if there's an option in the afternoon.
So the annual budget for this would be at $7,500. Again, it's an annual program funded through tax support ongoing. Next item here we're going to talk about is, you would have seen in your package, there's discussions around the possible outdoor rink at Civic Square. Not talking specifically about that capital project, but with the project, and there will be utility costs and some minor supplies and maintenance required. So we're expecting that based on the cost, based on the facility operating for a few months at the end of 2023, there'd be approximately $15,000 required for additional utility costs. Again, even if the building isn't operating, there are utility costs as far as transmission and distribution once those lines and meter are put in. Following a full year, we're expecting approximately $35,000 yearly for utility costs and other maintenance and small supplies required for the facility. So that kind of concludes the items that I had on the docket here for service level enhancements. I just wanted to quickly open the floor to council if there's any items you're expecting that were missed, or any items the council would like to bring up for administration to come back with more details on.
Any questions for Kyle? Councillor Avery.
So I guess this question's for you, Mayor. Is this the time you want us to start looking at what we feel we should be looking at taking off the budget, so then Kyle can bring this back to our next meeting? Or are we just going to leave it all as presented and then discuss things like omitting that police officer we committed to for 24?
For tonight, and Kyle, I'll ask your opinion as well. Like I want Kyle to do his presentation with all the staff that are here this evening, ask questions, and then we can deliberate.
Okay. Yeah, so the next budget meeting on December 5th, that's essentially earmarked. There's no more presentations. That's earmarked for the yay or nay. We want to make sure council has time to kind of take all this in and feel comfortable about making a decision. But at the same point, if there's an item that comes up that you want to give a yes or no to right away, we're definitely open to that conversation as well.
So then for tonight, we'll just listen.
Moving on to, so that was the operating budget. So we're going to talk about the capital budget, and we've got this broken out a little differently than we have in the past. We've split this out by essentially funding source for how these projects are funded. So you see there's 4 sections here. First being fleet and heavy equipment, followed by buildings, facilities, construction projects, and our utility projects. So first, fleet and heavy equipment. There's 5 areas of fleet reserves that the town does have. First, operations and heavy equipment, parks and recreation, municipal bylaw, our municipal fleet, and our fire and emergency services. So when I'm speaking again to reserves, we're allocating various tax dollars to a savings account that will be used to fund these capital expenses as they come up. Just to kind of give a quick example of how Coldale has progressed and how finances have transitioned over the years. If you remember at the last meeting when we had the debenture debt schedule built from 2005 to 2008, there was a number of large pieces of heavy equipment that were borrowed for and had to be paid over long-term debt and long-term borrowing. We're now at the stage where we can allocate certain tax dollars to these reserve accounts that we don't have to rely on borrowing or grants to fund these operations and equipment required. So what we have done as admin is we keep track of a estimated 20-year replacement schedule for each of these programs, and when each equipment would have to be replaced and an expected cost or estimated cost at that point in time. Again, we're estimating into the future here, so these are kind of our best guesses at the time. The first one is just to summarize the operations, fleet, and heavy equipment. This require a $200,000 annual contribution. On the left here shows you as this funding increases what the annual funding is and what the expected balance in the reserve is. On the right here are the expected or anticipated capital expenses over the next 5 years. So hydrovac coming up in 2023, followed by a boom auger truck and the loader in 2025, and the tandem truck in 2027. So as I talked about the 20-year capital replacement schedules, this is a snapshot. It's only 10 years. It gives council a good idea of the planning and budgeting that we do to make sure that these are funded. The top here, as we go left to right, you have the piece of equipment with the expected life expectancy, when it's to be replaced, and what the cost is estimated today. The cost as we move throughout the schedule does increase based on an inflation rate. And at the bottom is essentially the cash flow. So how much money are we putting into reserves? What are we expecting to pay out for that equipment? And what's that balance at the end of the year? So when we're going through this, you'll notice again there are several items scheduled for replacement. Our practice is to only bring the next year items specifically to council for discussion and approval. Each of these other items, if council doesn't have any glaring concerns, we like to put it in the budget as a placeholder, which they will come back to council for further deliberations the year before they're scheduled to be purchased. So for example, the boom auger truck and the loader would come back to council in 2024 for, again, further discussions. Right now, it's just a placeholder.
So the hydrovac truck for next year, is this something the town needs? We haven't operated one because it hasn't been roadworthy for years. We've contracted it out. So is this really an expense that's...
Yeah, so, and perfect timing, we're on to the hydrovac business case here. So,
my name's Terry Mayer. I'm the Public Works Supervisor. And as we were just discussing, we have the hydrovac replacement. And maybe I'll answer your Councilor Avery's question right away. Yes, for the last couple of years we haven't operated it. It's been emergency use, standby only, because we were unable to take it out to the roads. We were lucky that prior to it being taken off the road, we had just cleaned everything in the town. And then we've just kind of skimped by doing very minor contracting out to just keep it, just some of the critical ones clean right now. We've probably spent a little bit this year just in the siphon and like I said, some of the major catch basins. But it is something that we will get behind on, and unfortunately the cost will be borne yearly anyways. I did break out a couple of comparisons to actually purchasing one or leasing a hydrovac or contracting it out, and the cost breakdown is there on the form.
Councillor Beekman.
Thank you. In regards to the hydrovac trucks, we've got the cost replacement, but are you going to have to hire another staff member or do any additional training or stuff like the operating costs of this purchase? Are we looking at any increases there?
No, we have a couple of hydrovac operators already that
Okay.
obviously operated the one previously.
Okay.
And we don't need to hire any additional staff at this time.
Okay. As for the fleet maintenance, our town mechanic we wouldn't need any additional staffing for repairs on it as well, right?
No,
Okay.
and he would be part of, if this were to proceed ahead, he'd be part of the RFP process as well.
Okay.
So he's involved fully.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor, and through to Terry. Thanks for providing clarity on some of the breakdown here. My question to you is the number of places or items that you look after: 322 storm manholes, 418 storm catch basins, and 636 sanitary manholes. Is that an annual maintenance program that you go through?
I put them all in there just to give a scope. All the storm catch basins should be cleaned out yearly. We've got away with it. We haven't had very bad winters the last couple of years, and we've been able to pick and choose. But if we continue to proceed on, we're going to fall behind, and then we'll get that granular into the storm sewer lines, and then eventually we'll have bigger issues with it.
So just a follow-up question too, that as an item like this is really an important piece of equipment that really would be vital to your operation on a regular maintenance annual basis.
Yes, it would be very critical. It is, as I said, we could go with other types of arrangements, contracting it out. I was pretty conservative with the $200 an hour for contracting service for a hydrovac. It's usually up a little higher. The other benefits, we don't clean out all the sanitary manholes. We flush the sanitary lines, but it would be useful in emergency situations where we got to dewater or move out of storm sanitary. So I've added that in just as a number, but we don't clean all those, but all of the storm, the sumps that we have around town in various buildings. We would like to get a true curb stop replacement program in place as well, and the hydrovac is the best tool for that. This is also a smaller unit than what we currently had. No flusher, because we have council approved a flusher for us a couple of years ago, and that's what we use now. This would be just for cleaning the catch basins, digging holes.
Deputy Mayor Pickering has a question.
Thank you, Mayor Van Ryn. Do you have any idea as far as what you would be spending to operate this truck per year? I mean, I know we use one at work lots and they're very high maintenance. So if you're looking at like $44,000 a year that you've spent before, what would you think you'd be at renting one if you wanted to cover most of your work?
So as the breakdown is there, over the 20-year span, the price of this one would be $19,700. To lease it for 6 weeks out of a year, which is about the 220 hours that we figured that we would use it, not including emergencies or anything like that, is about $23,000. There are some challenges with leasing, as you kind of get them so trying to book them for the time you need them. So there's a little bit of a challenge with that, but it's a little more expensive. And then to contract out on a conservative $200 an hour, it's $44,000 a year. So that's purchasing is about half of it.
But out of that $44,000, you're not paying for fuel, maintenance on that truck or anything. As soon as we purchase this truck, we're going to be liable for fuel, maintenance, insurance, if something breaks. And I know how they operate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious if you had an idea of what you thought you might be looking at for that.
Well, I don't have the numbers on me. I can get back to you with that.
Okay.
Councillor Beekman.
One more, thank you. And thank you for answering all these questions. Just the 220 hours per year, what's that based off? Is that an average of?
The amount of work that we would have to do. So when I sat down with your utility supervisor and we went through all of the jobs that we do, the amount of hours it would take, and then that's what I used to base all of the dollar amounts on.
Okay.
It's 220 hours. Most of that is going to be catch basin cleaning, which is going to be about 4 weeks, just over 4 weeks for just that alone. And then the rest of it is the other smaller jobs that we have.
So the 220 hours, that's a very ironclad minimum then.
That would be a minimum.
Yeah.
And like I said, as time allows, we could use it more. But
yeah, thank you.
And then would this change when we have a water main break? You would still contract that out, and when you contract that out per repair, that includes the hydrovac being supplied by the third party contractor?
Currently, that's how we do it, but if we had a usable unit on hand, we could also provide that service and then reduce some of the costs.
And this smaller one could do a water main break?
Yes, the picture I have on there is actually a hydro dig unit. They work in town as well. You just have to empty them a little bit more often, but for getting around town here, it's a better unit for us.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Avery.
Thank you. So in the past, have we RFI'd or RFP'd this service like we do our waste and recycle? Or was it just a company that we called in and they charged us $220 an hour? Because there could be an opportunity to get it for $150 an hour if it was put out for especially this type of hours over a 4-month period. There's companies I would think that would come in a lot cheaper than this type of money.
Justin.
Good evening. I'm Justin Person, the Director of Operations. I'm just coming to assist Terry in some of these questions, and I have an answer to that one, specifically Councilor Avery. For contracting out, we would do an RFI, or it's actually an RFP process for any of our services. However, I think Terry's $200 an hour was pretty conservative, like he said a few times, due to the demand of these trucks throughout our oil industry and throughout Alberta. So you'd be requiring a contractor to essentially supply us one for at least that 4-week period, any time beyond that. So I think that $200 an hour is a pretty respectable number.
So just to confirm that if we need one right now, if we don't own one, we're at the mercy of the contractor to be able to find one that could come in a timely fashion.
Exactly, and even one of the local contractors is very good at providing the availability in emergencies. However, this is more for a maintenance program, and I don't think the availability of 4 weeks would be out of the question for that unit specifically. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so we'll move on to the next category here for capital reserve. So parks and recreation equipment. Again, so the same theory and concepts to apply here. Again, on the left is the annual funding. Once we factor in that funding with our capital expenditures on the kite, provides council with a little bit of cash flow, and we're expecting that balance to be. So 3 of the items Russ will talk to today is a new tractor, a snowblower attachment for that tractor, and an auto scrubber. Again, so the items here for 2024 and 5-6 are scheduled for replacement in those future years. We don't have anything to present to council on them today. Again, a placeholder for future years, but again, if anything that catches council's attention, happy to discuss that as well. Again, just a snapshot of our long-term capital schedule here, showing the equipment when it's expected to be replaced and the cash flow tracking.
Can I just ask a question just on all these items here? So maybe we'll get to them a little later on, but just a quick thought with the new rec facility and high school coming on. Some of this equipment will be necessary to obtain for after 2024.
So there will be additional equipment yet for the recreation center. We haven't included that at this time, as it will partly be developed and included in the business case for the recreation center likely next year. So this equipment is to essentially maintain current operations, with the rec center and enhancements. That's not included in this calculation, but something that council should expect perhaps next year.
Okay, Russ Tanner, the Director of Recreation and Community Services, and you got me for a few here. And just for clarifications, this is a new tractor, as on the previous slide. It's a little bit technical on my part by the tractor replacement. This is a new tractor as the Parks Department continues to grow in green space and pathways for snow removal and things like that. This type of equipment is necessary with that growth. This tractor is larger than the existing tractor in the fleet in the parks, so it's got more PTO and horsepower to be able to operate other equipment that's more efficient, which you'll see a snowblower coming up just in a minute here. And so this tractor is necessary with growth of the department. Do you have any questions?
Go ahead.
This price you have on here, this isn't a for sure number. This is just a number you're throwing out there.
That is correct. Yeah, that's correct. We've gotten some quotes, and we've padded that slightly, understanding how things are going right now with supplies. But $80,000, we feel pretty comfortable that it'll come in under that.
And it would be a tendered.
Oh yes, yeah, for sure. All right, and then so this snowblower attachment is a replacement. There's an existing snowblower. There's a picture on it on the next page. We'd be replacing that. It's pretty much inoperable at this time. The one that we'd be replacing it with would be compatible with the tractor that I just brought up.
Councillor Beekman.
Would it be compatible with the old tractor?
Terry?
Yeah, sure. All the attachments would be.
Okay.
Thank you.
The auto scrubber.
And the auto scrubber. So this is a piece of equipment that's used at the arena right now and in the pool, in the community center over there. And we're at that point where we're starting to replace components, not able to replace components to that model anymore. And it's a replacement and it's updated for that. So just a picture of it.
So thanks, Russ. So we don't have anything scheduled here for a bylaw fleet, but again, provide council with a snapshot information of how it's funded, $15,000 annually. The next scheduled item would be the full radar van up in 2025, followed by a CPO vehicle in 2027. Again, just another breakdown of our capital replacement schedule for bylaw. Next item, so this is kind of an ongoing program that we've had in place for a couple of years. For our municipal vehicle fleet, we've allocated in the past $60,000 every year the replacement of one truck. So I'll let Terry back to the stage.
Thanks again, Council. Terry May, Public Works Supervisor. This is just our annual replacement. The town currently operates 32 pickups or 32 vehicles outside of emergency vehicles. And this is just to keep the fleet up to date. And we run on a replacement of the top line vehicles and then push other vehicles down. And some of the older vehicles we have in the fleet we keep for our seasonals through the summer. And that's how our replacement program works. We have the council in 2019 approved 5 new vehicles, well 4, and 1 was a bylaw vehicle. And since that time, we were just trying to stay ahead of our replacement. So currently we have it listed as 1 per year, but that will probably need to increase to 1.5 every other year, having to just continue a 20-year life.
So the annual funding here would be $55,000 annually through tax support. The $5,000 is the estimated salvage value as we do sell and dispose some of the older vehicles every year. So those funds were kicked back directly into the program as well to save on tax dollars a little bit that way. Did I see your hand?
Councillor Chapin.
Thank you, Mayor. And maybe through to our CAO. Do you recall a few budgets ago, maybe 4 or 5 budgets ago, talking about leasing vehicles? And did we go anywhere with lease versus purchase?
Yeah, I think Kyle would have some background on that.
Yeah.
I believe it was brought up in this conversation before. With our vehicles, we do, as we replace them, we are kicking them down further through the line. So the older vehicles do get used by the summer staff as well. So we're not having when staff are going out cutting grass and whatnot, they're not driving around in the newer vehicles. So by leasing them, it becomes more expensive when you start keeping them longer and kicking them down into the fleet to essentially get as much value as you can out of the vehicle. Because even though it's maybe 20 years old, it still has relevant usage for park staff in the summer and whatnot.
Thank you.
Next item here is regarding our community services vehicle.
So again, on this one, the town operates, it has two vehicles that we currently use for community services. One is a Ford Explorer and the other one is a van that we have. We're currently not using them both to capacity at all. And the community services definitely needs a vehicle that can handle some of the events that are coming up, hauling the equipment around to the different events that we're going on, hauling the trailer or the float. So our proposal here is to dispose of these two and replace with a pickup that then we can push down in the fleet, switch between departments, and is more utilitarian for the whole fleet, not just for these unique vehicles that don't really have the carrying capacity.
When we're looking at the budget for this, there's a number of pieces of equipment and vehicles that we had in stock that we weren't using before. Those were disposed of the year, so those proceeds right now are, we do have those unbudgeted proceeds available. So the thought is to take those funds and to use that to invest in this program. So this wouldn't be an ask or an extra increase to the tax support, but essentially using dollars from other equipment sold to fund this new item.
So, question for community services, like for the amount of times that they use a vehicle, and correct me if I'm wrong, like would it be money better spent if we were to give them one of the trucks that flow down the line, and then would we, if we're going to be buying a brand new one, wouldn't there be a better place to put a brand new vehicle and then put another one down to community services if they're not using a truck very much?
You certainly could. I mean, it doesn't have to go to that role, but there is, like I say, they're out there right now doing the picnic shelter and with a 4-wheel drive.
Right.
So, a lot of our older vehicles are still 2-wheel drive. We're starting to get caught up on that now, but a lot of the older trucks are older 2-wheel drives. That's why they're used for the summer mostly.
This is also labeled as a community services vehicle, which they would use most often. But again, the Explorer often is used by other staff. Sometimes if they need to, it's been used to go Calgary for meetings or whatnot. So that vehicle would also essentially act as that purpose as well.
And if I could just add another dynamic too, with the new facility coming online, tables and chairs and stage equipment and things like that being offered at multiple facilities, we're looking at a truck being more effective. I'm okay with the idea though, if there is an older vehicle coming down. Certainly was just a situation where we looked at these two vehicles, knew that there was an opportunity there to maybe get some money for them and create a situation where a vehicle would be more compatible for the services it's using. I know even our community services department oftentimes will need to borrow a truck from elsewhere because there's certain things you just won't put in these vehicles.
Yeah, I didn't think about the rec center, so thank you for the clarification.
So the last item for our fleet is touch base on our fire and emergency services. Again, so just a summary of the funding currently put in, proposed increases to funding and the ending cash balance. So as far as capital expenditures, there's nothing scheduled for next year. But these are the items that are earmarked for replacement down the road. So when you do see, say, the rescue truck for 2024, 50%, again, we do have local partnerships for fire and emergency services that have capital replacement excluded as previous service arrangements. So again, just kind of a snapshot of what council can expect for upcoming items in future years.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor, and through to Kyle. With these units, are these 100% town-owned, or are they partnership truck vehicles that we have with the county?
So they're 100% owned by the town of Coaldale, but there is sometimes partnership arrangements on the funding for those vehicles. But when it's purchased, it's owned, registered, insured fully to the town of Coaldale.
So because if they're in those partnerships, then they're agreed with those cycles that you take them through?
Historically, yes.
Okay.
As part of our fire agreement with the county.
So we touched base on 5 of the areas here. This is just a summary of what we've gone through. You see, you don't have the annual fleet truck replacements because those funds going in would be budgeted coming out, so they would have a carried forward balance. Currently, with all of those departments, the reserve balance at the end of the year is projected at $1.175 million, expected to increase to $1.5 million in 2027. Again, even though that balance is 1.5 in 2027, there could be some larger items scheduled to be purchased in 28, 29, 2030, which requires kind of cash build up to fund those expenses. Okay, so moving on to the next part for the capital budget, we're going to talk about buildings and facilities. So similar to the fleet and equipment, the town does allocate specific reserves to these buildings for smaller renovations and capital maintenance. The funds allocated to these, just based on the smaller nature, aren't designed for full capital replacement of these facilities. With that in mind, again, it's important for us to consider long-term facility replacements when that may be required, so we can start building up savings and reserves to fund a larger capital expenditure when the facility may have to be replaced down the road. So going left to right here, we do have the facilities that we currently allocate funds to, the estimated balance in those accounts at the end of the year, and then how much we're projecting to add to those reserves over the next 3 years. So going from approximately $300,000 next year up till 2027 and 2025. I'm going to touch base on these facilities and the projects in here. I'm just going to give you this remote if you want to see those.
Okay, did you want me to just go to the business case?
Yeah, that works.
Okay, all right. Russ Tanner, the Director of Recreation and Community Services again here. And so the first item on here is the Tot Lots Spray Park and the Tot Lot and Spray Park. So both the Tot Lot and Spray Park have some drainage issues on them. First, the Tot Lot area has some concrete that's holding some water, that's stagnant water, that's creating some issues. Staff are having to squeegee off. It comes from rain and some of the irrigation overspray, especially with the wind and things. So we're looking at correcting that at the Tot Lot area, and then also we're looking at the Spray Park. The Spray Park has an issue where the spray from the park itself is kind of overspraying out further than the concrete. With the traffic on that turf that's around the concrete, it's creating mud holes and messes that we're constantly cleaning up. So we're looking at extending that concrete to capture that water and bring it back into the proper drainage system. And so with that in mind, we can accomplish both those situations with $10,000 in concrete work. Any questions? We'll go on to the next one, the wading pool leak repairs. So for some time, there's been a leak at the wading pool in Coaldale, and we've been able to fix a few breaks with success. However, there's still a pretty substantial leak where we're losing water on a regular basis, and to the point where we have a constant flow within in order to keep the water level there. We have found through investigation that it's certainly on the inlet side, so that's the water coming back to the pool. Unfortunately, that circulation system is underneath the pool basin itself and then travels up the concrete walls and out to the pool. So the fix is for us to take the concrete out surrounding the pool basin, so the concrete that's the pool basin itself would stay intact. We would take the deck concrete out for a few feet around it on the entire perimeter. We would core new inlet lines, and we would lay new pipe back to the main, which we've already exposed. And so basically abandon the old lines, create some new lines that would fix that. And then at the same time, we'll also deal with a few toy sprays that are on the perimeter as well that we feel are leaking. We'll be able to access them at the time. So the estimated cost for that would be $25,000. And this is just kind of showing you some of the research we did and be able to see where those inlet lines are and the plumbing that exists underneath the concrete basin. And what we've done is we've created a pit area where we've been able to accomplish a couple things. First, we've been able to expose where the main lines are coming up to the pool basin, so that at any point in time now we can access and do the proper research to know where things are. And actually the picture on the left-hand side of that screen is showing us uncovering those prior to heading under the basin. And the other thing we did is that pit's been dug out a little more, and there's a sump in there, so that any saturation happens that underneath that basin is taken out or removed immediately, so there's no reason thaw and continued issues. All right. So.
Councillor Beekman.
Thank you. Russ, can you remind me what the pipe repairs we just did last year were?
Yeah, so the pipe repairs at first is we did find a leak in the closest inlet in. It felt like that was likely the issue. Yeah. We repaired that. It improved the situation substantially, but we were still losing a lot of water. So that's where we realized that there were other leaks within the inlet system, and that was the only inlet that was accessible from behind that basin itself. So. All right. Okay, there we go. Spray park water cannons. So the most popular spray features likely at the spray park are these water cannons where they can spray each other, spray other people around. The cannons have been there since opening 2011. We can't get parts for these anymore, so we're custom making parts for them, which have become very costly, and they're breaking more regularly as they get reefed on. And so we're at a point where we'd like to replace those two cannon situations with features that we can get parts for, and also with features that have a better track record for not breaking down. So that's what this cost is, and that's at $16,000. That's $8,000 per cannon. And I think that's it.
We're on the docket for a little
I'm on the docket for a little bit. All right, so I'm still here. All right, senior center, entrance roof line. All right, this one's actually going to show a good picture here. What we're running into here is we're running into the east trough, and downspouts are freezing up like often they do during the winter, and they're backing up, and so the water's falling directly onto the sidewalk. It's been an ongoing concern, I'm told, for years. Safety concern. We actually, to the point where the concrete itself is becoming, because we have to chip away at it, things, it's becoming worn and uneven. So the plan here is to move that roof line out, similar to the roof line that's closer to the entrance there, so that when that happens, it doesn't happen on the sidewalk itself. And the cost for that is $25,000.
Deputy Mayor Pickering.
Thank you, John. Right through the rest. Did you have a contractor look at this to get this estimate?
Yeah, we did.
So it's pretty firm then.
Yeah, that's an estimate that, again, we've added a few $1,000s for. But
Okay.
it is the actual cost. And we've done a number of things on this roof where we've put kind of those V separations in to try to get the snow melt and things to improve it. And we've improved it, but nowhere near where it needs to be from a safety perspective.
Our senior's going to really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's what I hear. It's been talked about for a while. So. All right, air conditioning, community center air conditioner replacement. So community center's air conditioner is a situation where it's at its end of life. Again, the same story here, kind of like a broken record, but parts are no longer easily accessible. It's breaking down. It was down for a period of time. last summer and needs to be replaced. So, and the cost for that unit is 12. There is only one at that location. Whereas the next one you'll see there, the library's got 3 and we'll replace the ones. Okay, pretty self-explanatory there. And like I said, oh no, we're not there yet. The ice arena roof joint sealing. So this speaks to the overall longevity of a building, the envelope. It's important to make sure that moisture is not penetrating. We have had situations where we have had leaks over the past few years that we found and fixed. But unless you're up in that crawl space in the ceiling that you can see in this picture on a regular basis, we're only seeing the leaks that are penetrating through 2 layers. And the building, the work that Coldell has done on that building up to this point is really good. We've done the metal cladding. We've done a really good job to that envelope of the building to keep it going. This is just another addition to that to be able to seal those seams that run north-south the entire length of the roof. And if we do that, then we're confident that we're not getting water penetrating through the roof, and it'll just prolong the life of that building.
Councillor Beekman.
Thank you. Everything has a shelf life. What's the projected longevity of this ceiling? Like until we'd have to redo the job again?
Well, it's metal. As you can see, it's not the old timber style, which I was pleased to see.
Right.
It's got tons of supports. I am not an engineer, but what I can tell you is as long as we keep moisture out and relative environment proper within, this can continue to go on for years to come, right?
The ceiling on the roof though, like, do they have a 10-year guarantee on that? 20-year?
Those metal roofs, this maintenance that we're suggesting doing now is the preventative maintenance, but it's metal and it'll last as long as metal can last. So.
It's on the perimeter though, it's not the roof itself, is it?
No, this is the roof itself. Yeah. Perimeter will be the next, what we're talking about, the next these drops. But this is the roof itself.
Right, but a compound to seal a joint wears down with sun and water and whatnot. That's and most roofing companies will offer some sort of a guarantee or something.
Yeah, 10 to 20 years. Sorry, I thought you were talking about the roof itself.
Okay, no.
Gotcha. Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
the application of this should be 10 to 20 years, depending on heat and direct sunlight and weather right through the winter months, things like that. So, yeah. Okay, good. And then this is the eaves trough. So this is the perimeter, and this is a maintenance thing too, is where what we've got happening here at this location, they're massive eaves troughs or massive drains, and we've got lots of trees and foliage around the building. They're coming in, clogging it up. We also have pigeons that on a regular basis are nesting in these, and so on an ongoing basis, our staff were up there removing debris from these. This would solve a lot of those issues and a ton of time from a staffing perspective, but it's an eaves trough grate across where you'd be able to get up there and sweep this off rather than have to move things out of the so. And then this also stops when you do get it damming up and debris in there. It also causes the same issues as the previous, where water can penetrate through on the perimeter and cause other issues. Freeze and thaw. All right. Ice compressor 1 rebuild. So these are the compressors that are in the refrigeration plants that do preventative maintenance. So to keep them going, to keep them operational, there's a industry standard as to how many hours they'll run for. That you can rely on prior to them starting to give issues, which it would be a bad thing in the middle of the ice season. So we're at those hours. This is up for rebuild. $12,000 is a lot less than replacing an entire compressor for a refrigeration plant. And this is preventive maintenance that comes up from time to time, anywhere from 5 to 7 years. I'm not totally intimately involved with ours at this point, but we're at those hours. So.
Is there only one compressor in there?
No, there are 2 compressors, and so they'll alter which ones are going quite regularly, and so that they don't both come up for this maintenance at the same time. All right, cool. No questions? There's a picture of it. All right.
There's no case for this, but maybe just touch base on the museum a little bit.
Okay, yeah, for sure. So the museum, the museum's got stucco on the outside of it. We've just redone the foundation. We did do some patch repair on the lower extremities of the museum. What we are noticing is the stucco is starting to crack and starting to weather. It's early stages, but if we were to do this paint, this diamond paint is what they call it, it would prolong the life of the stucco to the point where $40,000 is really a fraction of the cost of having totally restucco that entire building. So this is kind of a preventive maintenance, and also will, brighten up that outer stucco, make a difference. And so this is something that we're looking at doing here in the future. So. Right.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor, through to Russ. When I was on the museum board, we had talked about redoing the pad where all the outdoor exterior, the old equipment is sitting on. Do we have any update on that? Is that a plan still where they were going to change or update that area where all that old equipment sits?
Go ahead.
They're talking about redoing that, cleaning it all up and moving stuff around right now. So I believe it's ongoing into the next year.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. All right. Next one is the curling rink, and these are very parallel, the same recommended treatments, preventative maintenance for the joint sealing and the straw. So right here, the same thing with the curling rink is it's a metal roof. The ceiling joints are weathered and starting to allow moisture penetration. This is to shore that up and make sure that we don't have any moisture penetration into the roof and the attic of that building, similar to the arena. And that cost would be $20,000.
Councillor Chapman.
Is that going? Thank you, Mayor. Is that going to be done at the same time as the arena? So you do the curling rink and the arena at the same time?
Yeah, they're both projected to be in 2023. So we would be able to do them at the same time if this goes forward. Yeah. And then same thing with the curling rink eaves, troughs, and grates. We've shown that they're the same design, the same roof for the most part, just a little bit less material required, and that's why you see the difference in costs. All right. Library. So the library has 3 air conditioning units. One was replaced in 2021, and the other 2 are needing replacement at this time. And the cost to replace both of them would be $10,000 for all the same reasons that they are aging equipment that are costing us money, and parts are burning up.
You want to just go back and touch base on the roof replacement?
Oh yeah, for sure. So we scheduled in here in 2026 for roof replacement, and that's just the life cycle of that roof. There was some damage done and some wind that we did have patched and repaired, and at that point in time, we were told that we're coming up on its lifespan when it was looked at that point. So we've earmarked this for 2026 to replace the entire roof, just as a placeholder. So. All right. So baseball fence capping. So this is from a safety perspective, it's really quite safe to say that it's an industry standard to be able to actually say that this is on most fences for the safety of the person playing the sport. We've started doing this ourselves on, if you go out there, this is actually a picture of Diamond 4, I believe. Diamond 5. Okay, Diamond 5 and 6 were done, and we're now suggesting that we do the entire rest of it. So from a safety perspective, we'd like to see that done. We're a little surprised that it wasn't done initially. So, any questions? Self-explanatory there.
I think that does it for you.
All right, sweet. I'll just pass the baton.
Okay, and this item is for the town shop, the hoist replacement for the mechanic bay. And the council saw that when they were at the shop last year. This hoist is 20 years old, so it's at the end of its life now. We do have it inspected every year. Parts are getting a little bit harder to come by, and we're just at a point where we need to replace it. Our intent for the estimate is based on is just a slightly larger unit, as this one is not capable of lifting up some of the newer equipment we have, such as the street sweeper and some of the picker truck, some of the 1 tons we have. It's not capable of lifting those, so the cost is included in just pricing that enough to carry some of the heavier pieces of equipment we have for our mechanics.
So will the new one be able to lift anything that we have or not?
Just about. There will still be exceptions like that. That plow truck probably, unless we strip it right down, then it should be okay. But and then if we were like that boom truck, that auger boom truck is a little bit too big for that as well. But everything else should be able to go there.
Do we have enough ceiling height?
We would have to look at the door. The door is we have enough ceiling height. The door is a little smaller on that side, so but it would be able to pick up when we get the sweeper in and some of the smaller single axles in, and be able to actually get them up on the hoist so we can count it off the ground.
Thank you. Councillor Beekman.
The current hoist is operational. It's just getting old.
It is operational. The last 2 inspections we've had on it, it's fine.
Okay.
But getting parts where it's been getting difficult, just the age of it.
Okay.
We'll be able to sell that, or would they take it and trade?
We'll see what they would want to give us for it, or if we could sell it for them, and we try that. But I didn't get an offer when I made the estimate on it, so I'm not sure.
No.
Okay, so I'm here to talk about the Columbine Cemetery. This is something we discussed at a council meeting about a month ago. And this is just a placeholder in this budget until after we do the RFP process that council requested. The RFP process would include local funeral homes to decide if we want to work with them to build this columbarium, to invest in the capital portion of it, and then partner with them on the administrative side of that. That report will be coming back to council sometime in the new year after that RFP process for council decides. So this is a placeholder for the capital purchase of council so wishes to proceed with the internal project of the columbarium.
So this is an item too that, should council wish, it could be excluded from the budget, with the mind that we would be coming back in 2023, depending on the outcome of the RFP, that council could amend the budget and add it back in. Council could leave it in as they choose. So 2 options there to consider.
And have we looked into what other municipalities are doing with this? Are they partnering, or are they putting them in themselves?
I have not, but that is part of the process is comparing to other municipalities. As part of this process, one of the comparisons would be that, and also the price of the niches to make sure we're within that market value.
Because based on what the niches are going for, even at $1,500, I think you might be a little bit low on that. I think, for us to do this on our own would be a good investment.
I would agree at this point, but it was the last meeting that council asked to have that RFP process done.
I totally understand.
Going forward here, we don't have any items as part of these remaining facilities. But again, I thought it was important just to show council how these reserves for these buildings are funded and what the cash balance is looking like should future requests do come up. So Ken Shelter, again, $15,000 annually. Same with the hub, nothing proposed at $15,000 annually. Pool, so we do have the $495,000 construction project, which we will talk about further along this presentation. $15,000 annually. And the recreation facility. So we all know, again, that facilities require maintenance, repairs. With this facility being the magnitude it is, and the biggest in Coaldale, a couple years ago we thought it was prudent to start saving for future repairs when these do happen. So this capital reserve wouldn't be allocated or earmarked for any of the funding to actually build the building. But again, it would be that savings account for when something happens or something breaks, a little bit of a piggy bank and nest egg to draw from and fund such an expense. It's just a summary of the facilities that we've gone through. So when we do the budget, it's we work with staff to best identify the projects that have to happen now and kind of what's on the docket for the next couple of years. But again, with facilities that are older, sometimes additional projects do come up in future years. So you can see that 2023 does have the large portion of capital projects. The cash balance is expected to increase over the years to 2.7 in 2027. But realistically, as we go through the years and things come up, it's not unrealistic that there will be future repairs and asks and projects related to these facilities. Okay, so that kind of concludes our facilities broad part of the budget. We're going to move on to our capital budget construction projects. So items here, I believe Dustin, once he introduces himself, will speak up to 7J. So I will hand over to you. Please introduce yourself.
Dustin Yankee, Manager of Infrastructure. Good evening, everyone. So we're going to start off with the Civic Square outdoor space project. This was last discussed with council on May 9th, regular council meeting. You'll see here the council made the motion to proceed with detailed design. They also directed us to start community engagement as well as approve their funding commitment of a minimum of 25% of up to $1 million to get the 75% funding from the federal government. Administration held an online survey through Let's Connect Coaldale online from June through September. This was promoted through social media as well as during our Summerfest, or our Coaldale Summerfest event. You'll see here we had 105 responses total. 83% of those were in support of the outdoor skating rink being incorporated into the space. 56 of those were in support of prioritizing the expenditure of the chiller unit in 2023 to make the skating rink operational as soon as possible. And aside from recreational skating, other top priorities listed were farmers markets, live music, kids events, and festivals. This is kind of a reminder from when it was discussed last. The proposed private features would be an off-street parking lot, as well as the addition of angled parking along 19th Street. The parking lot would also serve the Civic Square building and adjacent businesses. The skating pad and chiller unit. The skating pad concrete surface would also be used for other events during the summer months, as well as potentially in the winter. There'd be some landscaping with irrigation, as well as a breezeway that connects along the west side of the Civic Square building to Main Street. Site lighting, also looking at incorporating lighting with trees. We considered a bathroom facility with attached snack stall concession, as well as a garage structure to house the town's current backup Zamboni. The gas fire pits, we're looking at collaborating with ATCO, as well as a consideration for the addition of a canopy structure over the skating rink in the future. And just to note, we're not anticipating at this time that any additional staff will be required, although there will be some additional man hours that can be squeezed in between rentals at the current arena. We're not predicting that we'll need to hire anyone additional to operate the site. This is just showing additional rendering that FWB Architects did for us. Being in the cost estimates, we broke it out into two parts, Part A and Part B. So Part A, we have the site works. So that's basically the parking lot, all the landscaping, the skating surface comes out of 1.6 million, we've estimated. The ice chiller unit enclosure, basically just a fence structure to protect it. We've been quoted at 350,000. Just note that we predicted operationally that electricity will cost about 3,300 during peak months. This is a figure that was provided by a distributor. Zamboni storage, we're looking anywhere from 125 to 175 estimated. This is largely depending on the aesthetics and the functionality of the building. There's some operational, I call it niceties that we can incorporate that will make things easier on our end. So depending on how the budget sits, we might be able to spend more on that to help us operationally. So the total for part A, we're looking at 2.1 million. And then we've separated out the bathroom, facility, and concession as what we're calling part B. It could be something that council considers at a future phase. We could ensure that there's space for it and potentially the rough ends for it during phase 1, so it could be completed in the future. But I guess likewise to the Zamboni structure, depending on council's intent with the design, how big they want it to be, what they want to incorporate, we're looking at anywhere from 300,000 to 500,000. Also, that's largely dependent on the aesthetics of the building as well.
So Dustin, with the building for the Zamboni storage and then the bathroom facility and concession, wouldn't that make more sense to do one large building to have all those features in there? And then something else that we need to think of is where are we going to put the tables and chairs from the atrium side, because we have no storage rooms for that in that building. And there was some discussion about possibly putting them in the same building where the Zamboni is going to be. So instead of having, are you talking having 2-3 different structures versus one big one?
So I guess to answer the first question, there would be some efficiencies in doing one bigger building. You definitely pay per square foot typically. It really depends on the scope of the bathroom. Like we could do a bare bones bathroom with 2 stalls type of thing, maybe for a marginal cost. But what we were looking at would be four individual stalls for men and women on each side, which is typical to what we've heard have been done in other recreation facilities. In terms of the chairs, we have discussed internally on some opportunities within the building that we think could work. Russ, you mentioned something recently. I don't know if you want to touch on these a bit more.
Sure. So Russ Tanner, the Director of Recreation Community Services. So yeah, like we've got tables and chairs for 240 coming, and actually from what I hear, they're here. So at the same time, we're looking at a little bit of a stage equipment with backdrop. The backdrop is curtains, right? So we can easily create I think it was a 24 by 24 curtained area at the back side of the existing atrium that would hide tables and chairs, but then also double services when you brought those tables and chairs out and use that space. You could use those curtains, you could use the stage pieces that are there, and anyhow, I've seen it done in other facilities. It looks nice, it looks professional, and with such a large space like that, when those tables and chairs aren't being used, only to a certain extent, the space isn't taking away from it. So it's just an idea temporarily. I mean, it's still a good conversation as we build over there. Maybe there are some opportunities. The only concern I might have with the logistics of having tables and chairs stored in a different building is certainly in the winter months trying to get those tables and chairs into that building. Also expecting rentals that have now key access to the facility but no staff setup, accessing that other building, 2 buildings now. So some logistics there. So trying to keep it as simple as possible. We'll have an opportunity, I guess, for a few months here to see how the curtain staging tables and chairs thing works, and then we could also provide some feedback at that time with how you guys think it's going. But it's an option.
And I still think that we should think about doing it outside, because you have that beautiful facility now, and now you're going to have the tables and chairs in a corner where there's all that glass hidden by a few curtains. I think we can do a far better job with something in the future with that. But my point being is, if we're going to do a Zamboni storage, and we're going to do the concession, and we're going to do bathrooms, we don't have to put the bathrooms in right away, but we could put the structure up and rough in for bathrooms, and then we can finish it as budget allows. But I think we should look at doing one large.
Yeah, I think, I don't know what the numbers are, but I think roughing in for the bathrooms wouldn't present significant savings. Like the structure itself is the big part of the cost. Servicing the building is a big part of the cost, which, I mean, if we do, depending on kind of what I was getting at with the intent of the Zamboni storage, if we do connect it to, say, the sanitary for easier dumping of snow, and that's an additional service and cost. So I guess depending on the intent of the Zamboni storage, and I guess, I don't know, we could look at the numbers, I guess, it's maybe scaling down the bathroom facility. Ultimately, we looked at it, I guess, also through the lens that inside the atrium, there's 4 bathrooms that could be used for events, whether it's an indoor or outdoor event. So there's the opportunity there. There's also been talks about I guess the original intent was to have a coffee shop in the northwest corner of the atrium as well. There's potential maybe repurposing that into a concession style servery that could also be used for events. So we kind of looked at it through the lens that if we did want to save money on this project, we could purpose those with inside of the atrium.
So for the Zamboni storage, you're going to need a floor drain in there, I'm assuming.
That's, yeah.
So you're going to need sanitary, so we're going to have to dig up for that anyways. And, if there's budget restraints, then for myself personally, I'd rather hit the pause button on doing this until we can do it all right the first time.
In regards to the budget too, the way we've kind of put the numbers together, if you just want to go to the next slide, Dustin. For the Part A, so I think the Part A excludes the bathrooms and the concessions. The 1.275 million, we have those funds for 2023, and if with that and approval, anything above that, there's some financial restraint for 2023. We do have a little more capacity in 2024. So should that kind of be a wish of council to go that way, there's some additional grants in 2024. So it's just a timing thing we might have to work with stuff.
Yeah, we can ponder it and then bring it up next meeting.
And couldn't we give ourselves an internal loan from our savings for $400,000 for a year and then just jump it back in 2024? Because I agree with what the mayor's saying. If we're going to do it, let's do it. Do it right off the bat, rather than putting an addition on in 2024. So I can't see why we couldn't give ourselves an internal loan from our reserves and make sure this project is done correctly.
You definitely could do that. If you did do an internal loan, that loan would have to be repaid through another fund like tax support or allocation. What we've done for this is allocating grant dollars to it. So if we went to just do grant dollars, you couldn't spend something in 2023 and then the next year go use the grant dollars allocated for 24 and retro do it. So the internal loan could work. It's just we would have to find a different funding source how to repay it.
Go ahead.
Just a follow-up question for clarity for Dustin. So the Zamboni storage area, is the idea that you would simply just expand on that building, the concession and the bathrooms, and it would be one building footprint, or would these be separately located structures? Like, what's the thought process? And
the intent, I think, would be to locate them still on the west side of the lot. We could definitely design it in a way where they could be expanded. So it'd be something we look at. I would just say maybe if it makes sense to separate them for whatever reason, maybe there's the opportunity. But I think for efficiency's sake, it's something we'll look at during the design.
Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Maybe I'm getting into the weeds here, and I'm not too sure the logistics of this. So we ordered chairs, just as an example, and so they would be stored in the separate facility. And then if there was a need for them in the atrium, then we would be hauling chairs back and forth from storage to wherever we need them. Is that how that would work?
My comment was that when we went on the tour of the rec center in high school in Strathmore, that's what they do there. They put up a, I think it was a 3-car garage, because they didn't have storage for their bleachers.
Okay.
And so they just rolled them out the door, and we could, I'm envisioning that we can do something similar here so that we could keep them in that building. As far as your comment goes about the having the key for the residents, like it would be a storage room for tables and chairs. So if they have a key to get into the atrium, they can have a key that gets them to the tables and chairs. And then as far as the bathrooms go, yes, we're going to have bathrooms in the atrium, but if we're going to have skating on a Friday night at 9 o'clock, are we going to have the atrium open so that people can just go, or we're going to have a staff member there to make sure that nothing goes missing inside the atrium? So, like, I think it's important that we do those bathrooms, and so that if we have skating till 9 o'clock at night and the lights go off, that there's bathroom facilities there. And again, I agree, like what Councillor Avery said, if we're going to do it, let's do it right. And I like his idea as well. But anyways, just food for thought. We can ponder and discuss it more next meeting.
Expanding, I just want to bring to council's attention that as part of the design for the outdoor space, we also looked at the surrounding roadways to see if there's any potential synergies that could be incorporated alongside construction. So looking at 19th and 18th Street, they both have pretty similar characteristics. The water main are both asbestos cement. They are undersized for current standards, and they would be eligible for replacement. Sanitary main, we do have CCTV footage, so we do have camera footage of both of those. They're not in great condition, however, just note that they don't serve a larger area, so the consequence of failure is relatively low. Asphalt, not in great condition, but also not our worst roads. So within the IMP, we did have condition ratings put on those. You can see there 305 and 205. Further, there's no storm currently, but there would be the opportunity to tie into the storm that was installed along Main Street during Main Street construction. So we could increase the level of service for stormwater capacity through a project like that. So just touching base on cost estimates, given that they are similar, I just have characterized the same costs for each. So looking at the deep utilities and services, including the addition of storm, about $435,000 for either road, asphalt and sidewalks. Given that you're touching the utilities, you're digging up most of the road anyways, so we'd be looking at likely a complete surface renewal for about $510,000. So I guess just kind of summarize, although they're both eligible candidates for reconstruction, we do feel that, I guess as we're getting further in asset management, that these aren't the higher priority renewal projects within other roads, or in contrast to other roads in town. However, it's something that was analyzed, given that we just wanted to take, I guess, a look if there's any opportunities for further revitalization that we could capitalize on in the downtown core. So with other projects proposed as part of the capital budget, there's limited funding available for such capital projects. So recommending, I guess in summary, just to defer this for a future budget discussion. And also keeping in mind, if we are chatting with Roger Brooks, maybe talking about these streets and maybe along the lines of something like what Lethbridge has done with Plaza Square. Can't remember the name of it, but downtown by 3rd Ave, looking at something along the lines of that if council was interested. So basically pushing this off to a future year with further intent to revitalize the downtown core.
So as part of this quote, is there storm involved with this as well then?
Storm, sorry.
Storm?
Like tying in the stormwater main?
Yes.
Yes, so that's $435,000 would be tying into Main Street and extending it. The storm, the grade of the roads on both of them kind of peaks in the middle. So the benefit of adding storm isn't significant, but although there would still be some benefit. So the next item related to this project, the overhead line burial. So you'll see here in yellow, there's overhead utility infrastructure that runs through both alleys within the project footprint. Fortis owns these lines. They have a joint use agreement with TELUS and Shaw to be on the poles as well. So we have been in discussions with them about burying their infrastructure. They do have a cost sharing agreement where, given the fact that the services are aged, they do have a, we call it a kickback for the fact that we're replacing it with new infrastructure. So after their investment into it, including some Shaw burial, we're looking at about $275,000. So this is definitely a functionality and aesthetic item for the space that we would recommend approving. This amount would come from the town's electrical reserve, which has a current balance of $975,000.
Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Mayor. So wasn't the east-west supposed to be buried with Civic Square when that was done? So the main power line, basically from 18th to 19th, wasn't that supposed to be buried with Civic Square project?
I think that's what we're showing here. So I guess,
right, but wasn't there, like, that was part of the project? So now we're asking for another $275,000 to bury this, but I thought that was part of the Civic Square project, was to bury that power line. So we're budgeting twice for this now, because this should have been budgeted when we built the building. And I thought that was all supposed to go underground at that time.
Go ahead, Kalen.
I can offer that the burial of the power lines wasn't associated with the building element of Civic Square. The intent was to address it as part of the outdoor component of the project, whatever timing that may end up be or whatever scope. It wasn't part of the building construction.
Because my recollection of a conversation at council was, because we made the mistake behind the fire hall not burying those lines, so this was supposed to be part of this original costing when we built this building. Because after the fire hall was built, or the extension of the fire hall was done, then was brought to council to bury those lines because of the hazard. So when we approved this, I was quite sure that this was supposed to be part of that project. But obviously I'm wrong if we're looking at it again in 23.
I was also under that same impression as you are. I'm a little bit shocked with this too.
Those discussions would have been done in what year ago, Jason?
Yeah. Well, we even last year, I believe, on one of our tours.
Yeah, when we were at the Civic Square.
We were just talking about what was going to be done in the future. Like, that was never part of the original contract.
We may have obtained quotes a couple of years ago just to see what the cost was, but it was never built into any of the tender documents for the building aspect. So I do remember talking about it and the eyesore that it represents for the outdoor part, but tying this project expense to the building, like those were never a formalized pairing.
Moving on to the next project, the Highway 3 Land Lakes Drive at-grade pedestrian crossing. So this was last discussed with council at the July 11th regular council meeting, where MPE Engineering presented their findings regarding feasibility of various options for additional pedestrian crossing across Highway 3 on the west side of Coldell. So they looked at at-grade crossing, overpass, and an underpass. So given the significant capital costs of both an overpass and an underpass, it was ultimately concluded that the town should pursue an at-grade crossing at the intersection of Land Lakes Drive and Highway 3, and plan for an additional at-grade crossing at 30th Street and Highway 3 in the future alongside development in the surrounding area. It's just a figure, I know it's kind of hard to see, but just depicting the upgrades that are included within the scope of work. So on the bottom, you'll see in the yellow, we'll be looking at reducing the size of the approach that for vehicles entering and exit fast gas. So basically, we're just reduce the conflict points for pedestrians that are traveling along here. So we're anticipating if we put this crossing in, there's going to be more pedestrians that are walking along this sidewalk. So I guess just following up further north of that, we'd look at widening the sidewalk there. That's in the orange along the Tim Hortons. Depending on, I guess, the width, and once we do some more analysis, we may require retaining walls. So that's been incorporated into the estimate for now. But once we get more detail into the scope, we'll have to, I guess, we'll be able to determine that. And then following further, we'll be doing some traffic signal upgrades, as well as a zebra crossing across Highway 3 in collaboration with Alberta Transportation. And then lastly, there's the CP rail crossing, tentatively looking at crossing arms and fencing, but we're still waiting to hear requirements back with CP. So upon approval, we could work with our consultants to nail down the scope of this project, essentially. Lastly, within the cost estimate, we'd have a proposed pathway that extends 650 meters all the way from Highway 3 to the rec center. So basically, this project facilitates the passage of pedestrians from 21st Avenue by Tim Hortons all the way to the rec center.
Dustin, can you just go back to the aerial shot? Okay, so that pathway that's shown right now with that gray line, the property that the town owns is to the west of that. That's that entire piece right there.
That's correct, yeah.
So right now it's going to be, you're showing it on the eastern property line.
Correct. Yeah. So the last item with that, we've recently had our arborists look at some of those trees. So given that the town owns that lot, we did have our arborists look at them. There was a tree that fell recently, and it's within the assessment, it was deemed that they're all in pretty poor health. So within the cost estimate, we would potentially be looking at removing some of the trees in 2023. And there has been, I guess there will be further discussions with the landowners to make sure that everyone's aware of what's going on, but just so council's aware that those trees are a potential liability currently, given the scope of this project would, I guess, dictate the allocation of the budget towards that.
And then just a heads up, myself and other members of council are being approached by the landowners in that area. And the one comment that came up from the landowner that's directly affected to the east is that they're requesting that that pathway be shifted over to the west so that there's going to be enough room to put a row of trees as a divider between that pathway and the residents to the east.
I guess my comment to that would be for pedestrians, it'd be a bit cumbersome to track back and then back again to 26th Street.
No, but the pathway that's going east-west, we can just extend that a little bit farther west before it turns north then.
Oh, and just push it slightly to the west?
So
yes.
So there's room for a row of trees.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that we would consider. That lot has not been subdivided, so essentially it's almost a free slate right now. So if we want to be 30 feet off the property line, then that's something that we could look at.
Thank you.
So getting into the cost estimates, again, we've separated it as Part A, Part B. Just given that the Part B are more level service improvements, Part A is what's necessary. So the CP crossing, traffic signal upgrades, paved pathway, we're looking at about $715,000. And then Part B, sidewalk widening by Tim Hortons, as well as upgrading the approach to fast gas, looking at about $370,000. So our recommendation would be to proceed with both for a total of $1,085,000 to be completed in 2024. see the funding sources here. 290,000 of that would be from the local government fiscal framework grant, 320,000 from the Canada Community Building Fund, and $400,000 from the Pathway Reserves, and lastly 75,000 from the Road Reserve Fund. So, looking at that intersection that's right there, Land Lakes Drive, 21st Avenue. This was identified in the town's transportation master plan back in 2019. It was completed by Watt Consulting. They indicated that the intersection would be over capacity by the year 2029 based on their traffic modeling. Their recommendation at the time was to install a roundabout, which would provide the highest level of service. This project was made a heightened priority back in 2020, like it was brought up by council. This is largely due to the geometry of the intersection, creating safety issues with poor sight lines. There's a lot of near misses. Personally, I noticed, and anecdotally we've heard in testimony by council at the time. So ISL Engineering was engaged at the time to create a preliminary design of a roundabout to look at some concepts and compare the option to traffic signals. So this was presented to council back on November 23rd, 2020. And at the time, council had deferred, I believe, due to budgetary considerations and I guess given the fact that looking at the traffic modeling, it wasn't necessarily failing at the moment. It was part of the discussion as well. It's just a visual overview of the intersection that we were just looking at there. So we see here on the right, this is the concept of the single lane roundabout. Based on traffic modeling, it would have capacity to accommodate traffic volumes up to the year 2036. And this is based off of acceptable level of services within the region. Just notate this in a contrast to the next option I'm going to show you. It's a little bit simpler to navigate as Coldwell's first roundabout, given that it's a single lane. Cost estimate for this option would be $850,000.
Will the tabletop or the center of the circle be low enough that a semi can turn to go to Home Hardware?
Yes. So all of the concrete, the center median, and the dividers would be mountable. So basically, they're designed for large vehicles to drive over top of them, but still try to delineate the traffic flow.
Thank you.
So this option adds an additional southbound lane. This just allows a greater capacity for vehicles that are coming off the highway. So that's where the traffic model is identifying the peak demand to be. So they've added an additional lane to create more free flow traffic, and this would have capacity past the 20-year mark. Just like to note that if we were to do option one, this could be completed at a later date with pretty minimal work. It's largely just a little bit of expansion on, you see there in the red, we need to do a little bit of land acquisition and a bit of changes to largely the west traffic divider, but it would be fairly insignificant work if we were to do that, say in 2036 as an additional date. The cost today to do that would be $900,000.
For the extra lane?
Sorry, to do option one, $850,000, option two, $900,000. If you were to do option one first and then change to option two, you're looking at about $100,000. Is what I've verbally been told by our consultants.
So just so I understand, option one, if we do that, that's $850, like you said. If we want to do the second lane right away, the total cost would be $900?
Yeah. Yeah. So long term, option two essentially would be cheaper. Largely the difference, I guess, is operationally complexity for Coldwell, so is that something for council to discuss? The other option we looked at was traffic signals. So it would require some minor geometric improvements to the concrete and the roadway. Also require some collaboration with Alberta Transportation because they'd have to coordinate the timing plans of both signals. There would be plenty of capacity for the intersection to operate with signals. And the estimated cost for these, about $600,000, would be a yearly operating cost. So currently, the town does not own or maintain the traffic signals in town. They are owned and maintained by Alberta Transportation, who has a contract with the city of Lethbridge. So we have reached out to the city, and they would be willing to work with us in a similar arrangement. These costs are definitely estimated because it's indicative of how many issues you have with the signals, as you all experienced with 30th Street. There's lots of issues, there'd be maintenance calls, so they would be paid on an on-call basis, basically. So the operation cost is really a guess. There's some additional considerations to mention. We have touched base with Alberta Transportation, and they're indifferent on either option, but they would still have to be involved before giving approval to a final construction package. Roundabouts are proven to be safer than traditional intersection treatments, such as traffic signals. When I say safer, I'm referring to collision severity. So when you're considering, I guess just to explain, the chances of a T-bone intersection or a T-bone collision are much higher with traffic signals versus a roundabout, where roundabout collisions are generally pretty minor. They're generally fender benders. Vehicles are practically going in the same direction. So although there may be a higher frequency as people are getting used to them, which is going down over time because there are many in the region, I'd just like to mention that there is data showing that they are inherently safer than traffic signals. We would look at installing pedestrian flashing lights on the east leg of the intersection. So going back to the at-grade crossing, if that's something council proceeds with, we would ensure, I guess, heightened pedestrian safety across the roundabout. But you could also, I guess, point out that the divider islands also act as a refuge island for pedestrians. So there is additional data that one could look to that shows they are safer for pedestrians as well. Depending, I guess, really on the final design and the functionality of them. There's a lot of nuances with them, so but that is what the data shows. Roundabouts would permit a higher level of service, so overall there'd be lower delays. There is the risk during peak hours of traffic demand that traffic could back up. So we would look at working with Alberta Transportation to, if there were issues, change the timing of their signals to try to avoid that during peak times. But the main takeaway is that during off-peak periods, it's generally going to be free flow conditions. So there's going to be much less delay times just during peak hour periods. Some might notice that the intersection may fail, is what some people point out about roundabouts. So it's more of a general comment. It's not saying that this roundabout isn't going to work at this intersection. It's just that there's sometimes comments that roundabouts near traffic signals have a sense that they might fail, but it's only during 5-10 minutes of the day.
And it doesn't affect snow removal at all?
There would definitely be some, I guess, additional complexity. Terry, Justin, probably.
Justin, Person Director of Operations. So, yeah, the impact in this intersection is limited because this intersection is such a headache intersection to begin with. As you can tell, every time it snows or rains and then freezes, we heavily sand this intersection because it's a priority intersection. So, for the snowplow to go in and around the roundabout, there's a little bit more of an operational impact there, but nothing to consider.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Through either one of you, I guess. In the $900,000 or the $850, are the pedestrian signals included in that price?
Yeah, that would be built into the contingency. We give a bit of a contingency, and those flashing lights are $10,000 to $15,000. So
for the pedestrian light, for the push pedestrian walk.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think that's important that you have that in there. I know it might be difficult with roundabouts, but they have to. You'll need it.
Lastly, as the mayor asked the question. Both of them would be or would permit what we call a WB21. So given or through the consulting's traffic software, they have proved that a semi-tractor could navigate the intersection. And then lastly, just to note, if construction impacts were a big consideration, the traffic signals would have less of an impact. So just looking at both sides of the coin. So our recommendation would be option 1 is $850,000. Towards a single lane roundabout to be completed in 2025. So we'd be looking at allocating this money from the local government fiscal framework grant.
So Dustin, I'm still confused. So 850,000 for the single lane, and we can do the double lane for 900,000.
Yes. So when this was last discussed, I guess there was kind of a push for, really against the complexity. So I think it's a matter of perspective, and as time goes on, everyone drives through more roundabouts and much less frightening. So if council wishes, we could go with the 2-lane roundabout. Definitely wouldn't say we shouldn't do it. The recommendation is just based on, I guess, the temperature of prior discussions.
So for traffic flow, which option is better, like 4:30 in the afternoon or 8 o'clock in the morning?
The dual lane roundabout's going to flow more traffic.
So that's my comment. For the extra 50,000, why don't we do it right? Okay. Well, we'll talk more about that. Deputy Mayor
That's a good question, Jack, or Mayor, sorry, because that new subdivision that's going in right next to it is going to add massive more traffic. So it's basically, in my eyes, a no-brainer to go the double, and then we're done with it.
The traffic projections they used accounted for development increases in the area. So when we say 2036, that's maybe full build out of that area plus some of the area to the west.
Yeah, we'll have access to 30th from that way as well. Councillor Chapter, you had a question?
Yeah, just follow up on that. With Deputy Mayor, especially with Kentucky Fried Chicken as an example to coming in, you're going to have your traffic load coming, looking for all the services in that part of town.
Okay, thank you. Moving on.
Next up, we have our road rehabilitation program. We mentioned this briefly at the beginning of the presentation, which we proposed incorporating a yearly budget amount towards this program, increasing by $100K per year in 2025. So what we've done here is built into this, the 2023 capital budget, a proposal of asphalt renewal projects as a way to, in a sense, make a dent to our current transportation backlog. As we mentioned prior, the infrastructure master plan is notated 57%, I guess, what we recall our current backlog back in 2019. So essentially, we infuse a bunch of money next year, upwards of $1 million, and then in 2024 and beyond, we would bring recommendations for a yearly road rehabilitation schedule that can be worked into the town's annual operating budget, as I just mentioned, with the $100,000 increase per year. So essentially, we're proposing to spend $900,000 from the town's
Land sale.
I'll get into that at the end, but spending $100,000 from the operating expense that we proposed, and then an additional $900,000 to, I guess, essentially really make a dent in our current backlog. Just touch base on selection criteria that we looked at for the projects that we're proposing for 2023. We looked at the asphalt condition ratings, as I mentioned, from the infrastructure master plan. We also looked at the condition of deep utilities. So we want to target roads where sewer relining recently has taken place, as well as roads that are not identified for deep utility replacements in the near future. Consultation with our utilities department to gain some insight on the history of service repairs and sewer backups. I'd also like to note that upon budget approval, we would intend on engaging with a geotechnical consulting firm just to verify the subsurface structure. So these condition ratings are strictly looking at the surface to make the best decision for rehabilitation option. We would like to know what the existing substructure is. So there's a bit of some estimating on what the rehab options would be, but just wanted to note that subject to change. It's just an overview of the options that we're proposing here, so I'll get into each of them in detail on the following slides. 10th Street, 19B Avenue. We recently relined the sewer main back in 2021. So this is a greatly expand the lifespan of that sewer main and reduce the risk of us having to dig up that road for repairs in the near future. The water main is an expected remaining lifespan of about 25 years. And the road condition rating is one of the worst ratings that we do have from the infrastructure master plan. And so looking at the figure here, you can see it's right by Eastview Park. We have 10th Street running north south and then 19B wrapping around on the top there. So the estimate for this is about $450,000 that would come out of the $1 million. Next one we have here is by Jenny Emery, so 22A Avenue and 11th Street. Looking at the deep utilities, water and sanitary mains, primarily PVC, with expected remaining lifespan of 50 to 70 years. Looking at the road condition ratings, 22A is in pretty rough shape, 105 and 11th Street. There's been some patching done there as well as 22A, but it's in a little bit better condition than 205. So we're looking at about $285,000 to complete both of these.
And then as far as the sidewalks, that's going to be on an as-needed basis on any of these roadways that we're looking at then?
So within these estimates, we made some, we've been fairly conservative, knowing that typically on a road renewal, you do have to replace a fair amount of sidewalk that is sagged. So if it's sagged, and then to maintain positive drainage, we have to replace that section. So I have included a contingency amount to replace a fair amount of sidewalk should we need to. But that's just essentially built in the part of the contingency. So once we get budget approval, we could look more and actually go out and survey the road and figure out how much we need to replace. But there would be some sidewalk replacement. So this item's at the fire hall. So back in 2018, I believe it was, administration originally intended to pave the parking lot and alley as part of the fire hall addition renovation project. This item was removed from the scope as a cost-saving measure at the time. So instead of completing this as a standalone project, we're proposing to include it in the procurement package of this $1 million worth of paving. So essentially getting some efficiency by including it in the same construction contract. So just touching on some of the benefits, by paving it and including some curbing, we could improve the traffic flow by defining the entrance and exit. Also improve parking efficiency for first responders coming to calls, be a little bit safer. So that's sometimes a little bit hairy with guys coming in fast, so a little bit more structure to the parking lot where the system's at. And then we look at some beautification by incorporating some landscaping features and trees. So essentially some landscaping rock around the concrete and then maybe some trees. So this is just a very preliminary sketch of showing the scope. We did include the alley in the cost estimates here. We're not recommending it at the time, just largely based on limited funding sources. But we have the parking lot estimated at $70,000, and then the alley, and as well as in front of the antique fire truck bay, to be about $60,000. So a recommendation for now would be just to proceed with the parking lot.
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Van Ryn. Does that include the alley though itself? Because that is in question right now. You've got grading in there. You've got it going. You're going to pave that parking lot where that pipe is crossing the road. You're not going to change that over to the next alley. You're going to end up with all that water ending up right there, and then come back in a year or two and redo the whole alley again, because that's what's going to happen there. The alley to the east of there too is the same way. Like, if you don't start the drainage somewhere, you're going to pave that whole parking lot. There's still going to be that pipe there. How are you going to work around that?
So we are looking at operationally, like looking the alley to the east. We've discussed internally some options. It is hard to tackle in the core of town. So without extending stormwater infrastructure at great length and spending lots of money, it's a little bit harder to tackle. But essentially, we're potentially looking at maybe incorporating a swale on the alley to the east that we could handle within our current operating budget. So it's something we're looking at in 2023 if we can fit it within the budget. Yeah, in terms of, I guess, the alley behind the fire hall, I don't know if I deem the drainage currently is impacting the alley as much, because the alley is quite a bit higher. So it does pool, and that swale is quite large, so it does hold a fair amount of water. And that's, I guess, another consideration. If you do pave the alley, it's also pushing more water into that swale further down. So it's kind of you're kind of chasing your tail. So, in summary, summary of the proposed projects. Just want to note here that, again, cost estimates are based off surface condition ratings. So once we do some geotechnical testing, it could dictate the scope of the project a little bit, depending on the extent of the rehab options that we need to proceed with. So if pricing does come in higher, we do not intend to come back to council for more money. We would just reduce the scope of the work within the allotted amount. Likewise, if pricing came in favorably, we would look at increasing the scope. There is definitely potential, say on 11th Street, where I propose that we could extend it further north. That's definitely a candidate for a national overlay as well. So there's some opportunities there. So our recommendation would be to approve the $1 million towards rehab projects, with $900,000 from the town's land sale reserve, and then $100,000 tax support, as mentioned prior to the operating budget.
Councillor Beekman.
Thank you. Do we have still an abundance of roads at the 1 out of 5 rating after these are taken care of?
So the condition assessments were done in 2019. It is largely subjective, and the condition ratings are, I would say, relative. So there aren't many other roads that are the same condition as the ones I've proposed. These are two of the worst roads. I can't think off the top of my head to tell you what the other ones are, but I wouldn't say there's many that are in as dire condition.
Okay, I'm just curious to know if there's other 1 out of 5s that would be more beneficial than 11th Street. I understand the benefit of 11th and 22A tying in together, but the area that I hear most about is that whole entire area south and west of R.I. Baker, and I'm just curious to know if any of those run into the 1 out of 5 rating.
14th Street.
14th. We've got the 14th Street. Yeah, 14th Street all the way to 18th Street. I get a lot of calls about.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. And condition ratings, that's, like I said, one aspect of it. Another consideration is also traffic flows. So higher traffic flows, you can look at it through the lens of level service. There's more people using that road, but it's also going to deteriorate at a different rate. So some of the lower traffic roads, I guess, receive less positive impact from the road renewal than the roads that are travel heavy, and they also deteriorate. So,
Good example of that is 10th Street with Eastview Park now being so busy.
And when we proposed these options to council as part of $1 million, we kind of wanted to show you like what could happen with $1 million, because there are so many different options and areas that you could pick. So if council does approve funding for such a program, it's not like you're locking in your choices for these roads. It's just this is an example of what that would get you.
Okay. Councillor Chapman, did you have a question?
Yeah, just another example of Land Lakes Drive or Fairway Drive down into Land Lakes. It's just another heavy traffic that's been talked. I hear about it all the time, but I think what Kyle mentioned is this is the start of something, right? So I'm glad to see something moving forward.
yeah, and I guess I could just add to like another. I mentioned at the beginning, but the big consideration for us as we get further into asset management is looking at the deep utilities. So even looking at say 14th Street, that does have older infrastructure, so we just there's a higher risk of water main or sewer failure at that location. So it's something council's gonna have to be aware of going forward, that we're likely going to have to replace some of those roads before we get to the deep utilities, because there's so much money going on. But there's also, I guess with this $1 million, we felt like it makes a fairly big splash for, I guess, in terms of looking at the value. If you look at Fairway Drive, that road would require likely a full reconstruction, just given that it's largely because of a water issue. So the amount of bang for your buck, I would say, would not go as far. So it's something, I guess, that could be incorporated into our asset management plan, but just given, I guess, through the lens that we're trying to apply here, we felt like these were the most appropriate.
I think one thing to consider here is this program working along with the sewer relining program and utilities valve replacement program. So the sewer will be relied, or at least the sewer inspected, so it's not going to fail the next year. And then the valves that are most important, the valves that are most likely to fail will be replaced. Same with the hydrants. So those three programs do work together to build this program.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So is 9th Street, you've got 10th Street going around Eastview to the corner. Is 9th Street, the infrastructure good there, bad there? Because wouldn't it make more sense just to do that loop and then we're done with that as far as cost?
We did look at that originally. It's something we were running with. That 9th Street asphalt is in much better shape than the rest of it. So that was another thing. We just figured bang for your buck for now. That we felt that it was better spent elsewhere, just given the condition of the zone largely. So that is something we could come back. I mean, there's a lot of easy wins, I think, for asphalt work in town. So we could come back and do work on 20th Ave and catch 9th Street then as well. So there are opportunities in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Next project, Highway 3, 20th Street pedestrian accessibility improvements. This one was brought to council about a month ago. So just a reminder, I guess, from that meeting, that Alberta Transportation shared their plans to complete some upgrades to that intersection, largely to the southeast quadrant to complete some radius improvements. This also includes replacement of the sidewalk, and then also at the tie-in to the CP rail tracks to improve the grading, which also includes some sidewalk work. So they had offered the town the opportunity to complete some additional upgrades within their construction contract. So I think October 24th meeting presented the options to council of either, I guess, the option of proceeding, and then if they wanted to proceed, we could either widen the sidewalks or replace them entirely. So we did have a motion made to replace them entirely for $82,600. We're proposing this money to come from the Road Reserve Fund, which has a current balance of $760,000. Next project, Northeast Industrial Park. See in this figure here, in the green is asphalt surface lift that was completed in 2021. The area in the orange is what we're proposing to be completed as part of this budget proposal. So this was all originally just paved bottom lift with the intent at the time to have the ability to tie in services for the lots without impacting the surface lift. So this area in the orange has been brought to council prior. We were originally intending on completing this in 23. However, there are still a couple lots that do require servicing that will be completed next year, so we're recommending to defer this to 2024 and also accommodate a bit of an increase due to asphalt increases seen recently. So we're proposing to increase the amount to $135,000 and then push it to 2024 to be funded through the town's land sale reserve account. Next item, the link pathway. You see here in the yellow, this section is phase 1 of the pathway, which Lethbridge County Council just recently approved on September 1st. So just give a bit of a background for those that aren't aware. Back on September 11th, 2017, the Town Council approved a letter of support from the Link Regional Trail Society in which they committed $100,000 cash towards this project. So we're basically just bringing it back to Council's attention to bring light and include in the budget. I just want to mention as well, within this alignment, alongside development in the area, we would be looking at tying in additional pathways that would facilitate pedestrians from the link pathway further into town. So the $100,000 is going towards the yellow alignment here, but additional pathways would be incorporated with additional development in the area. So this $100,000 would be allocated from the pathway reserve.
Councillor Champa.
Thank you, Mayor. And could you describe to me this little loop that's going to go around the north end of this project? Is that like a loop around and come back? Is that what the plan is?
I don't think it's entirely accurate. This is from their website. I haven't seen actual drawings, but I do know the intent would be to go around the storm pond there. So it wouldn't look exactly like that because that's not the shape of the pond.
This really doesn't, sorry to get in the weeds here again, but doesn't tie into the other pathways that connect, that are interconnected within the town of Coaldale.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, kind of what I was getting at with the intent would be alongside the other development in the area that those pathways would be constructed. So we haven't, I guess, proposed to build the pathway through the greenfield to get there. We're proposing to complete that with development roadways.
And yet one other concern I have with this proposal here that ends at Highway 512, would we be able to put in or have the Link Pathways Committee have a kind of like a big stop barrier installed there? The reason I ask that is simply because what I see residents or people utilizing that pathway is carrying on along Highway 512 because they're that close to Highway 512, and there'll be a high increase in pedestrian traffic, bicycle traffic, which is going to be really, really concerning and possibly very dangerous.
That's something that I sit on the committee that I can bring up at our next meeting about that. Councillor Beekman.
Thank you. Who's responsible for maintenance on the path following this?
Lethbridge County.
Okay.
Go ahead, Councillor Avery.
Thank you. So my understanding is the county has voted down the second phase of this because of the discrepancy going past 512. So it's a pathway to 512. That's going to be it, is my understanding. So I'm a little bit concerned about injecting money into this project now because it's not going to go anywhere.
You want to speak to that?
I can provide a little extra background. I did a debrief with some of the technical staff associated with the Link Pathway project, and they are going to be going back to County Council in December. My understanding is that there was some concerns from residents who lived in Vista Meadows, which is on just the other side of the current dead end. Their hope is to build it all in one shot, just because of economies of scale, efficiency, and they were anticipating getting approval from County Council, and they were quite surprised when they didn't on a split vote. And so I think what they're planning to do is go back, address some of the concerns that were identified, and then take that back to County Council, I think in a council meeting in December, in the hopes of getting approval for the whole pathway.
Go ahead.
Next item, 20th Street, 30th Avenue intersection. Back in February of 2021, Block Consulting was engaged to complete a transportation impact assessment for the South Cola area, which you can see on the right there, the area in orange, just east of Conway. The intent of the study was to determine what transportation upgrades would be required alongside development within the area. Partly triggered by Cottonwood development as well. The main outcome of the study was that upgrades would be required to the intersection of 20th Street, which is Highway 45, and 30th Avenue, also Cottonwood Drive. Out of the report, also 17th Street was noted to require upgrades, but it's expected that these would take place and be handled by the developer as part of the South Coldell development. You can see here, so based on Watt's analysis, they rely on Alberta Transportation's standards. And what you see here is a Type 2B intersection, which is largely dictating what the geometry of it is based on expected traffic flows. So part of the requirement of Alberta Transportation as well is to slightly realign the intersection, which would ultimately improve the safety as well. The cost estimate for this work, we're estimating at $400,000. This work would be required to be completed prior to Alberta Transportation giving a roadside development permit, which is required prior to the opening of any subdivision. So based on current discussions with developers, we're putting this project in the budget, placeholder for 2025, pending I guess the development of the South Coldell area. So the funding for this would come from the off-site levy road reserve account as well as the road reserve account. You can see on the slide there.
So as part of the Cottonwood development, originally, was there any funds other than off-site levies put towards this intersection improvement from the developer?
No.
Deputy Mayor Pickering.
This intersection you say is gonna be completed in 2025? Or is that what you're looking for? Because is this tied into the South Coldell drain project too? Because that's where all that water runs in front of there, down the acreages. So is this tied into that, or?
It's definitely something we're keeping in mind. We have this as a placeholder because it's required for development. But as we proceed with the like 2B, obviously that'd be something that we're making sure is kept in mind as well.
The water's going to be redirected on the south side of those acreages.
Yeah, because that would have to be taken care of before you could redo this intersection.
And I've included some contingency to, I guess, accommodate the stormwater as well. Next item, Rehoboth pathway connection. Back on August 5th, 2022, Council received a letter and petition to construct a highway crossing and pathway to improve active modes connectivity to Rehoboth Christian Ministries. This petition collected 110 signatures. The request was specifically to consider 3 different pathway routes, associated crossings across Highway 45 to connect from 14th Ave to Rehoboth. All 3 options shown on the slide here. This is just reenactment of the drawing that was provided. So see option 1 in the green there, we do a bit of a jag to the west and head up down 21st Street in front of the cemetery. Option 2 in the yellow is staying on the west side of Highway 45. Option 3 would be on the east side of Highway 45. So just touching base on options 2 and 3. Construct a pathway along Highway 45. We would need approval from Alberta Transportation. They don't permit changes to their ditches that would reduce stormwater conveyance or inhibit the driver safety. So with these in mind, it does greatly increase the scope of the project from what one might assume. Applicable design standards for this location, as the council is aware, would require a clear zone of upwards of 3.5 meters from the edge of the driving lane. So this would trigger the requirements of a retaining wall structure. Alternatively, we could potentially look at a barrier structure with approval from Alberta Transportation, but given traffic speeds and traffic flows through there, we're assuming that both would be required. So based on this, we deem both of these options to be unfeasible. So we looked at option 1, constructed along 21st Street. This would also improve access to the cemetery, which is a request that administration has received from members of the public in the past. So we kind of, I guess, saw this as a bit of synergy to achieve 2 wins with the same project. It also directs pedestrians away from the highway right away, so it'd be safer. The cost for option 1 is missing on this slide, but we're estimating it at $200,000. So our recommendation would be to approve option 1 along 21st Street to be completed in the year 2025. This money would be allocated from the Canada Community Building Fund, which has a current capacity of $520,000.
So Dustin, quick question. So with the new industrial park that's going to be going to the east of Rehoboth, and then 12th Avenue extension where it's going to connect to 845. So I know that's going to be many years down the road, but are we going to have pedestrian issues then with people wanting to walk to the industrial park and then walk to Coaldale? That they're going to have the same problem?
So what we could look at that time, extending further, I guess, north off of Rehoboth. It does, the north end of Rehoboth actually almost connects perfectly with the extension of 12th Avenue.
Okay.
So there is potential to tie in there. And then we would have to look into details, but whether we figure out an agreement with Rehoboth or we're forced to construct to AT standards, but ultimately, we have to look at that when the time comes. So there is the potential still to have a pedestrian crossing that could use the same.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. Mary brought up a good question regarding pathways. This is outside of the scope of the options, but obviously my thinking would be that the industrial park should also have pathway systems within their own environment there to connect each other up. But my other question would be with regards to Rehoboth there on the south side of them on the west. Is that a right of way that connects through that you could tie in from 13th Avenue into Rehoboth?
So the town actually owns those lots.
Okay.
Currently, yeah, we use that for storage for operations within the cemetery.
I'm in favor of option 1 if you're looking for.
Next item, birds of prey enhancements. So administration recently submitted a grant application, and Cam Mills touched on this at the last meeting, to the federal government's Natural Infrastructure Fund to try to gain some funding that could be put towards various upgrades to the facility. So just to touch on some of the items we proposed within the grant funding would be dredging or deepening of the east pond to improve the water quality. Adding some circulation pumping between the ponds, also improve the water quality. Construction of some additional pathways to promote more people into the area. some shoreline remediation, stabilization, as well as potential pedestrian bridge that could provide additional access points within the facility. So within the application, the town pledged $1 million towards the project. The intent with this is to try to show that the town has some buy-in, hoping that the feds would match us with an additional $1 million. The Birds of Prey Foundation also pledged $50,000 towards the project. So upon receipt of the grant, administration intends to prioritize the scope of work that we proposed alongside the Birds of Prey Foundation and work with the consultant to maximize the allotment of work that we could achieve within the funding amount. So once we know the amount of funding we have, from there we could nail down the scope of the project and prioritize, I guess, what we can achieve within the money. So the total project cost comes to $2,050,000, and it's contingent on receipt of the grant funding to move forward. If grant funding is not received, council may still choose to invest the $1 million into the Birds of Prey in 24 on a smaller scale project, or try to use it again as leverage towards other grant opportunities.
Just a couple notes on the funding. Again, with this $1 million earmarked from the sale of that Northwest land, there could be some timing that we have to account for as to when the land may sell, when the funds are actually available, if the grant does get approved, when the grant does have to get spent. So if those times are off, there could be some, based on cash flow for other projects, there could be some short-term borrowing needed to bridge a gap or bridge financing. And we also just want to note too, just to reduce surprises, the funds from the Northwest land were unofficially earmarked before for various infrastructure upgrades for the sanitary trunk line, and some other development infrastructure required. So with the remaining proceeds that would be left and then the offside levies, there is a potential from repurposing these funds for this project that there could be some shortfall funding for that in the future. We don't know specifically how much or if that's for sure, where we just want to make council aware of that by using this money. You can use it for that, but again, consider that they could have a shortfall down the road when we look at other development costs associated with that area. Yeah. Okay. Cool, man.
All right. Ross Tanner, the Director of Recreation and Community Services. So just giving you, council, a little bit of an update on a decision that was made earlier in the month, actually in October, where you did approve some the PVC membrane replacement and some pool furniture and some slide opportunities for $495,000. So just letting you know that we did get actually two proposals for the request for proposal. So two bids, and we are working right now on a contract with a bid for the PVC membrane replacement that will be under budget. Also an opportunity to do a permanent ramp rather than doing a removable ramp, so that the PVC membrane itself is kept intact and isn't damaged in the future. So we're working on a contract for that, and the other bid was over budget, so that one was under budget. The results from the request for proposal were taken to the Waves and Blades group at their last meeting, and there were some options for slides. So there were a number of options, and so we're working with finalizing some installation costs and some different options for slides to come in. We're showing this one right here, this is kind of the lower end budget of the slide opportunity within budget this shows that its overall height is 17 feet, and it's a enclosed flume slide that comes down into the pool. Here's another option we're working on to see if we can get under budget. There's some options for putting the spiral staircase on there, and we're just working on installation costs for this option. This would be pretty dramatic, quite the opportunity for people to experience quite a heightened experience at the pool. And so we're just finalizing costs there. And then here's another option that we're looking at with a little bit of a racer slide with a turnaround. This is already estimated also to be within budget, but again, we're still trying to get information back on installation costs. We are looking at even a third option, or actually I guess it would be a fourth option, where we'd actually take the green and white slide on from this situation and incorporate that race slide, drop slide, into that. So again, these were based on feedback from the Waves and Blades group on the slides, based on the information we're getting from the slide installers and suppliers, that they could actually custom make some of these options. That for the purpose of the request for proposal, they did give us some estimated costs. Now, knowing what direction we're looking at going, they're going to give us some more firm costs, and then the Waves and Blades group will determine which direction to go. Again, this project is scheduled to be done prior to opening in June of 2023, and so we look forward to quite a change there. Right. This is showing that for $12,800 we can put a permanent ramp into the pool rather than having one that's removable at $10,000. And the Waves and Blades group felt like that was worth the small extra expenditure. We do have contingency to cover that. So, right. So right now, this is an estimate cost, but we are estimating these costs to come in with contingency still and room for the deck furniture to be purchased. We're trying to shore that up and also look at what the differences are between each or each design on slide. Okay. Right.
This is more just information for council if you kind of audit the numbers and you see some things are kind of moved around a bit. So for 2023, the available grant funding has been allocated to that outdoor skating rink we talked about before with the 1275, and then the balance for the pool and some proposed funding for the designing of the skate park. So all this is just explaining that projects for 2023 versus funding is short right now of $190,000. What I've kind of done to bridge that gap is just not steal, I know it's a bad term for accounting, I will say borrow from our fleet reserve and push some of those, allocate those fundings to a future year. So this is just more of a higher technical level for accounting here.
Okay, and then also provide an update on the multi-use recreation facility and school. Some of the pictures you'll see here will be both of the recreation facility and the school. The superstructure, the structural steel is all up for the recreation department, so we are now seeing that the full erection of the entire building, both the school and the recreation center is there. There's actually portions of the change room area underneath the second level of fitness that are actually being tarped in and heated, and concrete is being poured when temperature permits. So here's some pictures just kind of showing you that, like I said, these ones are over in the school area. You can see that the masonry work and the walls are coming up. We're starting to frame in each room and the hallways and the joint space, and they're moving ahead quite well within schedule. What's happening is you'll see that as we start to enclose the rec center, there's less detail work and less interior work involved with the recreation space, because it's a lot of open space than there is out of the school. The Ward Brothers is planning on catching up the rec center portion of that back up to the school, before next summer, and then starting finishing work next fall, and we still are on schedule for March of 2024. All right.
Take this for a second. Okay, so back almost a year ago, when we had budget, the previous amount for this project was $15.75 million. in the January 17th special council meeting, it was approved to increase that budget to $18.9 million. At the time, we had a funding shortfall of $3.1 million. So we've been working diligently on this and how to kind of bridge the gap on the financing, because it's no small task. This is a snapshot of what that previously approved budget was. So again, the loan for the debenture, that's serviced and funded through the special recreation levy. We had allocated funding again from MSI Capital, Canada Community Building Grant, which is the old federal gas tax fund, and some reserves and fundraising. In looking at how to get to the new funding source, this, you can see we've added a few lines here to get to the total. So what we've done is extended our MSI grant from another year funding allocated to this. We had some savings from our lagoon project grant funding that we've also earmarked for this. Our fundraising goal has been increased to $2 million. So you see the 1875 is net of is a conservative net of fees. And again, we've had to extend some of grant funding else to another year, 2024. So local government fiscal framework will be replacing MSI. So it's essentially MSI. And then some small surplus amounts here that we had from 2021 projected this year and the sale of water rights. So I've just been kind of thinking since the discussion on the outdoor rink with if we were to expand the scope for the bathrooms concession, the bridge that this may be a project where we look at rearranging some funding to make those work between years. Skate park.
Yeah, I can give a brief update on it. The skate park project is moving forward in conception, plan, and fundraising. We've certainly met with some skate park builders, looked at some options. Council's been provided a presentation by them, so that we have a good idea of what type of budget is we're looking for, and so fundraising is underway. Did you want to talk about timing?
What we've earmarked funding right now based on timing, some petty cash here for 2023 to kind of get design and concept drawings underway, $40,000, with the remaining of, right now we've earmarked $400,000 for the town's portion, the remaining $360,000 for construction of that facility in 2025. Okay, so that was quite a lot for construction projects. This is just a summary for council. So we had all those projects we talked about. Here's just kind of everything on one page here. So the projects, the budget amounts, again, most of these kind of special new projects, the outdoor rink, the pool, the roundabout, and the pedestrian crossing are largely funded through our allocated reserve grants for the next couple of years. You can see 2023 is allocated, 24 and 25, about 170 remaining. I must say, as we kind of talked about the grants last week, MSI is changing to local government fiscal framework. Right now we're getting 867 in MSI. There's a chance it could go down, could go up. The funding details are still being worked out between the parties in Edmonton. But my initial thought is I think Calgary and Edmonton's going to get more funding, which if everything stays the same, there may be less funding available for non-charter cities. So we're slightly conservative in what we estimate for grant funding. This budget's largely comprised on that. So when we do have more information on allocations, we'll make council aware of this. So best guess of where we're sitting right now. But again, this could change. provincial politics are not easy to guess, and that's something we're trying to do right now. Okay, we are on the last leg here. Utility projects. So the three that we're going to touch base here. Each of these have some considerations for utility rate increases. So I'll let Dustin speak on the technical stuff, and we'll jump in for the utility rate increases.
Dustin Yankee, Manager of Infrastructure. Just to give, I guess, an update on Malay 2B. The town of Coldell and the county recently received news that we're both successful recipients of a $160,000 grant, which is 100% funding for the project from the Alberta government's Climate Resilience Capacity Building Program. This is going towards an update to the Moy Drainage Basin Stormwater Master Plan. So this master plan was completed in 2011 originally, and it outlines a multitude of projects within the entire basin that were proposed to achieve a continuous release rate within the basin of 2 liters per second per hectare. So for those that are aware, currently the town has a zero release rate policy, which operationally creates a lot of difficulties and risks internally with respect to flooding. So the outcomes of the study will include refined parameters specifically for Malay 2B, so basically determining the impacts of climate change, how much water is actually going to be coming through this basin, using a little bit better data that's available now that wasn't available in 2011, and just updating the model so that all our values are current. We're also going to investigate the viability of looking at an interim controlled release rate, so less than the 2 liters per second per hectare that I just mentioned, that would be achieved with full build-out. But something in between 0 and 2 liters that the town could potentially release in agreement with St. Mary's could have a huge operational benefit for the town. Lastly, this is partly a requirement through the grant funding, but we're also doing a climate lens assessment to shine light on future climate conditions and risk treatments for the proposed projects. So MP Engineering's working for the tri-party. So the grant funding is towards the town and the county because they were the only eligible recipients, but SMRD is also part of the tri-party agreement that was originally formulated. So they're one of the partners in the project as well. And this anticipated to be completed in March of 23. So just a reminder, this was the scope of Malay 2B. We're looking at catching the water south of Cottonwood and then conveying it to the abandoned raw water reservoirs. So just kind of leaning into the budget that's been earmarked. We're looking at spending some of it in 2023. So with the master plan updated, completed in March, there'll be some costs incurred for continued design of the Malay 2B project. We're also looking at potentially reinstating the town's raw water reservoirs, which will require a dam safety review. So this is another requirement, I guess a policy change that didn't exist when the original estimate was proposed. But Alberta Environment now requires dam safety assessments under certain characteristics of water bodies. So under the new policy, we now have to complete this dam safety review, which is essentially making sure that it can safely hold the water and it's not going to put an increased risk on surrounding residences. We'll also be looking at potentially completing the diversion connection from the Coldell lateral and potentially the South Coldell drain into the recommissioned raw water reservoirs, as well as partial excavation of the stormwater management facility south of Cottonwood. So this is work that we're looking at completing in 2023. So we're keeping the money that's budgeted earmarked for now, and then pending the outcome of the study and collaboration with the tri-party, these are the items that we've discussed that we're going to try to pursue.
So at the top here is the original budget that has been kind of carried forward over a number of years, right? So majority is federal and provincial grants, and then split the balance theory and ways between Coldale and our two other partners. As Dustin alluded to, the full extent and scope and cost of the project will be largely further determined and evaluated once the study's done. Realistically, total project cost could rise from up to $6 to $9 million. The federal and provincial grants aren't going to increase those. Those are locked in. So what we're trying to do is just think of, we know we're going to need additional funding if this project's to be completed. How can we start planning for this now to alleviate spikes in required funding? So this is just a breakdown of our storm levies and a storm reserve account. So offsite levies for storm haven't been touched in a number of years, and this is kind of what we have left in that. Again, we do have some money in the piggy bank too for what we allocate yearly to these storm reserves. Once you add those two up and you kind of subtract the funding that's already been committed to that South Regional Stormwater Project, we got a balance left of about $1.55 million at the end of the year. And then right now, this is how much we contribute annually to our storm reserve. So it's just kind of a proposal that I put together. Right now, our storm utility rate is a monthly charge of $7.95. So I looked at how can we bridge the gap with additional funding. So if a $2 increase was added per month for 2023, and then $3 for the year after, and $4 for the year after, what funding does that get us? So it creates $376,000 in cash that can be contributed. It also does create capacity for a debenture loan if one is to be needed. So just for illustration purposes, $3 million over 10 years, you're almost there to be able to fund that with this rate structure here. So what the administration is proposing would be a $2 increase on the storm per month for 2023. Any utility rate increases that are proposed are included in the bylaw for subsequent years can always be come back and amended. So they can be left as is, it could be increased as a placeholder, and further evaluated once the scope of this project is known. So some options for us to consider as part of this long-term planning.
Next item is the regional water study. So the town and county of Lethbridge recently expressed intent to partner in the submission of an Alberta Community Partnership grant to gain funding towards a regional water study. So the purpose of this study would be to determine the location of a potential water transmission line that would bypass around Coldale. In addition to, they would look at the location of our new potable water reservoir that we require, as well as the pumping station. So the benefit of the bypass line for Coldale is that it removes McCain's off of our distribution network, which would have significant operational benefits for the town. It also has some benefits for the county as well, where it would increase the potential for development east of the town as well. So funding eligibility under this program is up to $200,000 with the ability to fund 100% of project expenses. So given that the study will include much of the necessary work that we're going to have to do for the reservoir and pumping station, it's recommended to proceed with a defined scope, not up to the $200,000, but a smaller amount. So contingent on not receiving the $200,000 or any funding for that matter, we're recommending that council earmarks $25,000 that could go towards basically a $50,000 study that would be completed in partnership with the county that would, we're considering a regional water study that would look at the potential bypass line, as well as determine for the town where the potable water reservoir and pumping station would be located. And that location would be determined in either scenario, a bypass line or no bypass line. So there's benefits for our side in either direction. So that leads us into the potable water reservoir pump station itself. So this is an item that was originally identified in the town's infrastructure master plan, that our storage is currently below recommended standards to accommodate fire flows and peak demands during the summer months. So as development continues to increase, the pressure on this project also increases. So upon completion of the proposed regional water study with Lethbridge County, the town will have a better understanding, I guess, on the scope of this project. Largely, this is indicative of the location. We already know the size of it. To some degree, the pumping that is required, but the big question for right now is where it's going to be located and how that ties into the current distribution network as well as the current reservoir. The estimated costs for this project, reservoir as well as the pumping station, is $9 million. And just as a reminder, this was brought up at the November 14th council meeting, where council directed administration to submit a grant application to the Alberta Municipal Water and Wastewater Partnership Program for funding towards this project. So our recommendation would be to approve up to the $9 million. It's a project it is part of our critical infrastructure. It's something we need. So hopefully we get the grant funding, but we're recommending to earmark the $9 million. I'll get into the funding.
So,
Oh, sorry.
if the bypass line goes in first, do we still need to build the underground reservoir as big, or can it be smaller?
No, the capacity of the reservoir has nothing to do with the bypass line. So currently we have a requirement for fire flows as well as managing our peak demands. So it would, I guess, in some ways alleviate the peak demands, but there's still the fire flow considerations. And that's ultimately, to some degree, consideration for council in terms of level of service.
So if McCain comes off of our distribution system, that doesn't affect the fire flow then?
Okay, so when we're talking about the $9 million, there's still a lot of uncertainty about the scope of this project that will be ironed out with the future studies here. There's also some uncertainty regarding the grants, right? So we could get grant funding, we could not get grant funding. So as far as what we're doing with this capital budget here, we're not looking to budget $9 million for this right now in the budget. I think it's just something we need to be mindful of right now and kind of keep in the back of our minds and wait till these further studies and we get news on the grant to continue to evaluate it. So same as the Malloy, where we're looking at funding, cash in the bank, offset levies, funding available now. Again, this is all for the town's water utility project, so we don't just want to drain this. But this is our largest capital reserve that we do allocate funding towards, so $525,000 a year. When we're looking at this, we didn't propose an increase to the water flat rate for 2023. Their rationale being that the sewer flat is still going up in 23 for the other portion of the debenture payment for that Woodring project. So we're going to hold off the year, but we kind of do some hypotheticals here. If you did increase it $2 a month, you will be here in 24 and 25, where we would have more information as to what funding we need and the scope of that project. Kind of provides council with a picture of where the funding could go to, right? So right now, if we just kind of added our bulk water in there, we could go up to $525,000 annually funding, so $712. That would be, the increase would be again specifically for this project. So there are some options to bridge that financing that we have, that we are considering. So again, just something for council to be mindful of potential future utility rates.
That leads us into the potable water fill line replacement. So this is on the existing potable water reservoir. This is an item that has been brought to council in the past. It was earmarked for 2023. This was due to, we currently have a scheduled maintenance that we complete every 5 years where we draw down the reservoirs, clean them, do a structural inspection. So we had earmarked that to be completed alongside. However, given the advancements with the newly proposed reservoir, speaking with our consultants, it's become more clear that we should put a pause on this project because there may be some either synergies that could be realized by completing this with the new reservoir. There's also a potential scenario where we might not need our existing reservoirs. It might be more efficient to just construct a new one. So upon the analysis of that, we could determine if these reservoirs are required, then we can proceed with this, but it's not considered enough of a risk to the town. It's not in that dire of condition currently that we believe it needs to be completed. So we're recommending to remove this from the capital budget for now, and then identify it once we get more clarity on the new potable water reservoir.
Okay, so next, a little more about water rights. So we've had discussions before, but as part of the town's long-term growth, the town will have to acquire additional water rights at some point in time. Based on how much we may need or how much these cost, could cost anywhere from $2.5 to $5 million. So it's important to have the conversation of who should pay, how we should fund additional water rights. So our utility rate structure is formulated two ways. There's a flat utility rate that everybody pays. If you're a large business or if you're a family of one, you pay the same for a water flat rate. But the variable cost comes into how much actually water you use. And the more water you use, the more you pay, right? So as we need more water rights, the kind of thought was if we look at the variable rate structure and that if you use more water, should be perhaps more focus on those users to pay more for the water. So that's why looking at funding water rights, we just looked at the variable consumption. And these rates increases here, 10, 11, 12%, they do seem high. But with the cost of water rights that will be needed for long-term growth, the cost of water does go up. So if these rate increases were implemented, again, this is to paint a picture for council of what potential funding could be available to fund water rights. So in 3 years, if this strategy was adopted, council would have funding for $3.7 million for additional water rights. That would include savings over those 3 years, as well as funding that would already be in place for the debenture loan. So now that we're on utility rates, I'm just going to jump ahead briefly here. We'll come back to this. But this is just kind of a summary of what's been proposed or semi-discussed here. This is an estimation of if a household uses 10 cubic meters, which is, you may use less, you may more. It depends how much you flush your toilet, how often you shower, how often you want to water your grass, wash your car, whatnot. So the column on the left is estimated in utility cost for 2022 and 2023 on the right. So the big increase is already related to the sewer flat charge. So that is the other half required to fund that debenture and additional operating costs for that $11-12 million expansion and renovation at the lagoons. You can see when we're talking about storm and water, a 10% increase in water usage would go up by about $1 a month if you use 10 cubic meters. And the other increase here is the storm flat rate. So that would be consistent across the board, but that would be related specifically for the Malloy. Just wanted to highlight the fact too that utility rates, with the exception of sewer, were last increased in January 1 of 2019. So they haven't been increased for a couple of years, again, with the exception of the sewer rates. This is just putting that projection out a couple more years based on the assumptions we've used. Again, so while the increase is higher than maybe a normal 30%, I think it's important to consider that this additional funding is tied specifically to these capital projects that will benefit the community, residents, businesses in the town for a very long term. It's not just a rate increase just to pad out pockets. It would be a rate increase required to go specifically to these projects. Just for comparison, if somebody thinks I like my grass a little more and I do water my lawn a little more, we did put in a 20 cubic meter assumption here. So the percentages are essentially the same, but the monthly costs will be different based on water, right? So you can see the water would be about $2.19 monthly increase. Again, cost for water would be more expensive. The more you use water, the more you water your grass. I'm just going to go back here. So Russ, if you want to come back up. Got two more.
Speed through it like that.
Two more left.
All right, Russ Tanner, the Director of Recreation and Community Services. So we have a few items here. The Cottonwood Pond, this is also the Kinship Park, is what some people call it there. Has actually just recently been cleaned, but there are 2 fountains in that pond, and they both had pretty extensive work done on them in the last couple of years. They're limping along. They'll get through another year, we believe, but they will need replacements. They aerate the water and keep the water moving so that the process that we did this last year, it happens less frequently. Also keeps the smell away, just keeps aquatic plant life from accumulating at higher rates. And so that's what this is referring to, is those 2 fountain replacements at that location. So any questions? This shows you the pictures of it. Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Who is the town? The town is looking after these, obviously, and funding for the maintenance and all this. There's no fees charged into Cottonwood like in Lethbridge, like Fairmont. A lot of them places, they have a fee that's charged into the subdivision. That's strictly looked after and spread over the whole town then?
Yes.
I believe so.
Yeah, there's not any specific fees for that.
All right, and then the next item is the Cottonwood Fountain and electrical. So this would be new. This is obviously something that this is a storm retention pond. The water levels we'd have to work with operations on, and currently we aren't maintaining those water levels. It's brought up in mainly just because this past year there was some green algae formed in there. We did have to treat the pond. It is quite a bit larger than the other one. I think also some of the want to have a fountain there is certainly from a site perception, so like wanting there to look good as well. So this would be something that we're looking at $70,000. It could be a series of fountains. It could be one large fountain. It could be something that certainly council could talk about. There are a number of storm retention ponds around the community that don't have that level of service at this time, so that would likely factor in to any decision. But we feel like we could look at the design and make something work at that pond should it be council's want. Okay.
This is a 2025
Yeah.
project.
Yeah. So, oh yes, and I should have pointed out the previous one. Like I said, we can get through another year. That's slated for 2024 as a placeholder, and then 2025, based on what the appetite is with council and with the community. That's
Okay, so I appreciate everybody's patience. We are at the end here, so I just kind of want to summarize next steps. Our next budget meeting is scheduled for Monday, December 5th at 4 p.m. What we can do is provide council with some funding options. like our franchise fees, different tax mill rate changes between residential and non-residential. But if council does have any feedback for them that they would like to share to narrow any specific focus, it's not required, but it would be appreciated. But if council wants to wait to December 5th to make any approvals, final calls, definitely good with that. Utility rate bylaw would be presented to council for 2 readings. So ideally, we would present first reading on December 5th as well, and then second and third reading at the last council meeting, December 12th. Finally, some type of budget does have to be approved by council at the December 12th meeting. You do have to have a budget approved before the end of the year. So you can approve a final budget with all your projects nailed down and solidified. If you do have some uncertainties regarding some items, you can pass an interim budget, and then you could have further budget deliberations back in January of the year. So should you feel like you need more information or deliberations before making any formal decisions. With that is it. So I will see if there's any other questions from council at this time.
Any last questions, comments for Kyle? Well, thank you for a very well done presentation, and I appreciate all your team members here helping with that. So any last comments from you, Kayla?
I don't think so. On the 5th, it'd be helpful if council came prepared with, definitive direction, because that'll be our last opportunity to check in before we take a budget to council for ratification.
Okay, thank you. No more questions. So then I guess we can get someone to make a motion to adjourn. Councilor Reese, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you.